We are in the John Nitz Community Wing of the Community Center for our workshop this morning. If you all could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a brief moment of silence. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please, Deputy Clerk.
Of course. Vice Mayor Panieri?
Present.
Councilmember Gambaro?
Here.
Councilmember Miller?
Here.
Councilmember Sullivan?
Here.
And Mayor Norris is absent.
Thank you. We will now open it up to public participation for items that are not on today's agenda. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. My name is Dennis Sokola. I live in the F section of Palm Coast. I moved here because of the core values of this town, and I was living a dream until March of this year, when you passed opening it up to short-term rentals. I went from living a dream to living a nightmare. Other towns that passed this kept it out of residential areas, only in commercial areas. I've lost many nights' sleep. It's affecting my health and my wife's health. Being woke up all hours of the night is ridiculous. I was here on the 13th. On the 14th, that night, 2 days later, I woke up at 3:30 in the morning. From Friday night this weekend until last night, I go to bed around 11:15. 11:30, quarter to 12, the party starts. They come out of the bars, they go back to the house where I live. It's behind me. It's got a heated pool, and the party starts there. It's ridiculous. I'm at my wit's end. My wife and I are both losing sleep and getting sick about this. I don't know how this got initiated or who influenced anybody to vote on this, but it's ridiculous. If you did your research and seen that other towns restricted it from residential areas, you wouldn't have made this mistake. It's a deep, deep mistake. And I don't know any other way of taking care of this, but maybe litigation. I don't know. But you're supposed to be helping people, keeping their quality of life there. I don't see any quality of my life anymore. 14 years I lived in this house. I've done so much work on it. I've got it perfect the way I want it. I have a heated pool too. I have a big lanai. I have a big yard. I don't go out. Our neighbors don't go out in the middle of the night and scream and yell. These people that come here from other states, mostly from out of state, come here. They have no rules and regulations. The VRBOs have no listing on Palm Coast, like this piece of paper I got here when I first moved here. That's the code and ordinances and stuff like that, okay? They don't care about what time it is. They go back to that house and they party. I'm sick of it. I'm really sick of it, and I shame on all of you that voted for it. And I wish you would do something about this, because I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not moving. I'm too old for that. It's ridiculous. I got a house that's worth $650,000 after I fixed it all up. And now I got to sit there every night, put my head on the pillow, and have a crapshoot whether I'm going to get woke up or not. And I've been losing 85% of the time.
Thank you for your comment, sir. Good morning.
Mark Webb, Palm Coast. To follow up with that gentleman, I was here for the 13th meeting, and the meat of that meeting had to do with code enforcement and the plethora of things that the city is trying to work with, whether it be chicken coops or whatever. And I found the consistent conversation was enforcement. There is no enforcement other than citizens pointing out issues to other citizens. Now, I'd like to expand that to bring to a challenge to you guys at the city with this upcoming 2026 budget. I'm a big proponent of lowering the speed limit. Some of you on the council have been working with me for years. I walk my dog. I'm out there on no sidewalks, which is the majority of the cities we have here. The number one issue that was brought up in that traffic assessment that I saw was the failure of people to follow the posted speed limit. I think it said something like 80% of the people that they observed on Florida Park Drive and other places exceeded the speed limit. Where is our law enforcement? Where are the people that I pay annually to enforce those speed limits? I go to the Sheriff County Daily Records Report, I think it's called the Commander Report, and it shows how many traffic stops are done. But that's it. Were they warnings? Were they a value added? Do we need to get to the point where I'm sitting in my front yard with a camera, my cell phone, and taking pictures of people speeding by to make reports? Because that's what the city code enforcement relies on. The citizens to point out, to tell on, to take pictures of trucks and chicken coops and all of this plethora of things. Do we really want our citizens doing that level of law enforcement for speeders? No, we don't. We don't want a society where we're throwing each other under the bus. We hear too much about that, sadly, every day politically. Your job is to get in front of this, find out why the sheriffs aren't doing what they want, find out why maybe we need our own police force. Just my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webb. Anybody else for public comment? All right, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the dais. Any response substantively from our acting city manager?
Yes, Vice Mayor, thank you. If the resident who was concerned about the short-term rentals, if you could please provide your address to Mr. Jason DiLorenzo in the back so that we can look into that, as well as Mr. Webb, if you don't mind filling out a comment card so we have your address and we can put in, and Commander Woodward would be happy to speak to you about the traffic enforcement and speeding in your neighborhood. And not related to those two comments, but since it's kind of urgent, do you mind me bringing up the ACH fees that you guys asked us to look into at the last meeting? That way, if we're making any changes, staff can do it during the meeting today.
Yes, would you mind if we allowed council to respond to the public comment, and then we'll circle back over to you?
Sure.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Councilman Miller?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Yeah, I was just going to mention that in terms of the Airbnb, we didn't vote to allow Airbnbs. They were allowed by state law. We voted to restrict them and to create a permitting process and an enforcement arm. So if there are any issues with Airbnbs in your neighborhoods, please report them so that the code inspector for the Airbnbs can specifically go out there. The way we also did it was pointed towards the owner of the Airbnb, not the resident. So one of the issues was people come, they cause a problem, gets reported. By the time someone gets out there, they're already gone. A new tenant, so to speak, is in there. So you couldn't kind of hunt down these people coming from out of state. And so it's more focused on the owner of the Airbnb so that they have a responsibility to do the right thing via the community. Otherwise, they would lose their ability to host an Airbnb. So that's just wanted to provide some clarity on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, just on the short-term rentals, while I was on the county, and I hate to always bring this up, we went through a long process, and it took many years of fighting to ensure that we did have an ordinance concerning that. I believe the ordinance here, I wasn't here when you did it, is similar to what the county did, and it again, is aimed at getting the owners under control and provide some safety. You also have just basic disturbing the peace after certain times at night, if it's that situation, there are procedures to take care of that. And so I know it can be very difficult for people, in a residential neighborhood when you have high volume activity after 10 o'clock. But I think the ordinances that you put into effect are about as far as we can go, given the state laws and everything else.
Yes, thank you. Councilman Gumbaro.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. City Manager, on the, I know after we passed the ordinance for short-term rentals, we were looking to quickly move to an implementation plan. Can you give us an update as to whether or not that's up and running, where citizens can go to look at the procedure, things of that nature?
Yes, so our citizens can file, normal complaints, whether it's code enforcement related, or even if they're having extreme and dire circumstances, they wanted to call law enforcement in the middle of the night, those are for them to be used. And then as far as short-term rentals, all the short-term rentals were required to register with us. That form and application is located on our website, as well as pay the applicable fees. And any further information is on our website.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, really important note on the short-term rental issue as well. State law actually precludes us from outlawing the short-term rentals. So as my colleagues have said, we've done, I think, as much as we can to regulate them. I did want to make a comment about the traffic enforcement. So traffic enforcement has, been an ongoing issue, I think, and concern for our residents, particularly in our neighborhoods. I did reach out to Chief Strobridge, and he let me know that Sheriff Staley has authorized 3 additional deputies this year to expand traffic enforcement unit. And he is also going to kind of mobilize the appropriate staff within the Flagler County Sheriff's Office to kind of beef up or come up with some campaigns to help with traffic enforcement. So as we continue to grow and we continue to see more housing, particularly with our infill lots, we know that traffic is going to increase, and we want to make sure that people are minding the speed limits. And I think the Sheriff's Office is obviously very sensitive to that, and is also very concerned with that for obvious reasons. So they are looking into it, and they're being communicative, so very appreciative of that. With that, we'll go back to City Manager regarding the ACH.
Sure. So, City Council, you asked us to look into the ability to absorb those auto pay e-check, and we further dug into that, and we came up to the conclusion that we receive about 40% of our collections through auto pay. And that's a mixture of payment, whether it's credit card, ACH, et cetera. And you have the ability through policy to absorb those fees, which would be about $200,000 a month. Now, that is dispersed between the various accounts.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, 200,000 per year.
Okay.
Sorry.
Give me a heart attack.
18,000 per month. Sorry. I misspoke there. And that's estimated. So estimated of 18,000 per month or 200,000 per year. And it's split between the various accounts, whether it's utility, solid waste, or stormwater, because all of those fees are on that one bill. And if you wanted to look into just absorbing auto pay for e-check or ACH, it's about 30,000 a year spread across those distributions as well. So it's, do you want to incentivize the auto pay and absorb the collection of those fees, or do you want to just simply look at auto pay and e-check only? So I would just need kind of your consensus to move forward, because this is scheduled to start June 1st.
So if we decide that we are going to absorb those auto pay fees, we need to budget the $200,000 additionally.
Correct.
And that would be between the, well, at least 2 funds, stormwater and utility,
And solid waste.
and solid waste. Well, no, where does the solid waste funding?
It's its own fund. It's an enterprise fund.
Okay, so it would be 3 funds. Okay. Thoughts?
How are we paying for it now?
we've been paying for it.
Right, so essentially, we've been paying for it, so it was in the budget, like it or not. I mean, you were paying for it. So what we're talking about is a fee that, like everything else, is hurting us and doing our actual full job of operations of the equipment and people. Is there a trade-off between if people start writing checks instead of doing the automatic payments, is there an extra cost in processing checks?
No, if they mail us a check, there is not an additional fee. And sir, if they also look into their bank may also offer bill pay, which eliminates the fee. You know, every bank is different. I don't want to say for all, but majority of them waive the fee if you were doing bill pay through the bank, and they would not be charged a fee from us for that service. This is just third-party fees.
Yep.
So if I may, we had this all kind of come back when we were doing the contract for the payment vendor. And if I recall correctly, I believe it was roughly about $700,000 total in fees per year. And that was when we kind of looked at whether, you know, and residents are paying it either way, right? Either it's through their taxes or it's through the fees on the bills. And so the thought process was to try to make that operation work as a business and do the same thing a business would do, and pass on those fees in that way versus just absorbing them but still paying them through tax collection money. And so, or user rates specifically, I think, for an enterprise fund. But ultimately, we decided to pass that on. A lot of residents utilize ACH and e-check kind of auto pay systems. And so there's been a ton of feedback. I think mostly some emails, phone calls, but also a lot of social media about that. That's a primary method of payment that most people are concerned with, and they don't believe that they should be charged that fee. The difficulty is because of a third-party payment system, they charge that fee. Other places don't necessarily do that. Other businesses don't do that because it's a third party. They collect a fee on it. So I think, in my opinion, looking at kind of these two ones that people use a lot, I think that $200,000 is kind of a trade-off, right? Instead of going the full $700,000, which is what we had coming in June, we could look at kind of these ones that are the normal avenue for most people to pay. And if we could allow those without a fee, you know, that would make life easier on the residents.
So you're saying that anybody who's enrolled in auto pay would not experience a fee. It would be absorbed by the city, rather than just parsing out those folks who use ACH rather than a credit card auto pay. The credit card auto pay and the other auto pay would be $200,000, but if people just use ACH for auto pay, it would only cost us $30,000 a year, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to, you know, if there's, I just want to make sure there's a method that's convenient and easy for someone to pay. Agreed. That doesn't cost money. So if it's just one version of that, so it's ACH only, and that's much cheaper, so to speak, then I'm okay with that too. I want to make sure that there's a way that residents can do it easily without feeling like they're getting ripped off.
Correct.
You know?
I'm with you on that. I think if we give the option of some type of payment without a fee, and it's on auto pay, that's the best way to go. Councilman Gumbar, did you have any thoughts?
I support either course of action.
Yeah, I think what's tough for me is, like, to your point, if residents don't pay a fee, then essentially, let's say one resident A pays via credit card and it costs $3 in a surcharge. Is that about right, Acting City Manager? $2 or $3?
Credit card, I think
It's,
1%.
yeah, it's 3.5, I'm sorry, it's $1. If it's online, it's $1.95 per transaction. But if they come into customer service and pay that way, then it's 3.5% or a minimum of $2.50.
Okay, so for ease of math, we'll say $2. So $2 per credit card fee, but you've got resident B who pays via ACH and it's only 50 cents. Then essentially resident B, if we absorb all of those fees, resident B is through their user rates paying for resident A's ability to pay via credit card. Does that make sense? So I almost feel like we're forcing other residents to subsidize the convenience of resident A. So I want to provide a fee-free way for residents to auto-pay their utility and stormwater bills. I think the best way to do that and to not make other residents still kind of absorb the choice of some to pay via credit card, I think the best way to do that is probably to only offer no charge for those who are paying via ACH auto pay. To me, that's the fairest way to do it.
Yeah,
I think that's the most common way people would pay as
that,
well.
that sounds reasonable, but in general, it's the cost of doing business totally.
Right.
And is there some way, if somebody insists on using their credit card, we can charge just them the extra? In other words, so we don't spread it over everybody else?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's kind of where I
yeah.
would come down on that, if it can be done without a lot of extra cost.
Yeah, so everybody who's paying via credit card would still pay the fee, but if you pay via auto pay and ACH, then you get no fee. We're waiving that. That's one of our options, right?
That is one of your options.
Okay.
That would cost you $30,000 if we're only doing ACH on auto pay.
And then you hope more residents will make that choice.
No,
and
it
switch
should
over.
incentivize people to move to that form of payment, which then makes everything operate at a cheaper rate.
And that's 30,000 per year, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Legal counsel, do we need a motion or do we just need consensus on the direction? Okay, so do we have a consensus? Sorry, you go ahead and speak into the mic, Marcus.
Just consensus is fine.
Thank you. Do we have consensus on one direction or the other as far as moving forward?
I think so.
Okay.
But 30,000?
The 30,000 ACH use.
Okay, so we're going to waive the fee for anybody on auto pay using ACH.
Okay, understood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
for looking into that.
Sure,
Sorry about changing direction on it.
that's okay.
All right, with that, we will move on with the agenda up to item E, presentations. Number 1, ordinance amending Chapter 29 impact fees, Article 2 transportation impact fees, Code of Ordinances of the City of Palm Coast to adjust the rates based on a comprehensive study, including an extraordinary circumstances study. Staff?
Good morning, Vice Mayor and City Council. For the record, Fong Wing, Senior Planner with Community Development Department. Before Mr. Jonathan Paul provide the presentation, I would like to introduce him to you briefly about his experience. Mr. Jonathan Paul has 25 years of public, private, and university sector experience in land use and transportation planning, traffic impact analysis, impact fees, and mobility fees. Mr. Paul holds master's in planning from University of Florida and a master's in public administration from the University of South Florida. He has worked as a concurrency and impact fee manager for Alachua County, I think one of the first county that has adopted mobility fee, and interim in transportation planning director for Sarasota County. Over the last 15 years, he has been the principal of New Urban Concepts and worked with governments and developers to create innovative land use concept mobility plans and establish creative techniques to fund mobility. Mr. Paul has served on numerous land use committees, land use and transportation review committees. And last year was the author of the mobility fees chapter of the nationally published book called Development Impact Fees. So with that, I'd like to also let you know that our last update in 2018, Mr. Paul also did conduct the technical report for the City of Palm Coast. So with that, Mr. Paul.
All right. Thank you, Fong. Good morning, council members. My name is Jonathan Paul, principal of New Urban Concepts. There's a lot of technical documentation and information we're going to go over this morning. So if there is a question that you all have, I mean, it is a workshop format, so it allows some opportunity for feedback as I'm going through this. If something's unclear, please let me know. You know, I've been doing this for a long time. Some of the things that are clear to me may not necessarily be clear to you all. So I just want to make sure that you're comfortable with what we're doing here today. And it's our goal to just give you the information that you need to make an informed decision on this matter. So the transportation impact fees for the city were last updated in 2018. They've been roughly adjusted over the past few years at a rate of 2.7% a year for inflation. That last adjustment actually occurred of January as of this year. Those rates have been relatively conservative, but in line with historic inflation rates. The last few years, we've seen anything but historic inflation rates, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on that as part of the extraordinary circumstances. Transportation impact fees are a way for new development to mitigate its impact. They are not fees or assessments charged on existing residents or existing businesses. This is only a one-time fee for new development to pay for their traffic impacts. The fee itself is based on the needs for capacity between today and 2050, and it utilizes, to the extent it's available, the most recent and localized data.
May I ask you what the percentage increase was in 2018?
I'd have to look back on that. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was in the magnitude of like 40 or 50%.
Okay.
But, you know, the city's been relatively good about updating its fees every 5 years. You know, what the city's experiencing now is what a lot of local governments in Florida are experiencing is just the last 5 years. Inflation and costs have just gone up dramatically. And this isn't necessarily something just to Palm Coast, but this is happening throughout the state of Florida right now.
I just want to point out is that prior to 2018, we were on a different evaluation of our impact fees. Prior to that, we used what we call it consumption base. And then 2018, Jonathan came in with LTG, modify and change it to a plan base. So there's two different type of basis in order to justify impact fees. So if you compare that 2018 to the prior impact fee, it's not a true comparison in terms of fees, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question with the 2.7% adjustments. Is there a CPI, like a transportation-specific CPI that we're pinning that to? Or how are we doing the percentage increase for inflation?
Historically, Department of Transportation would issue a report, and a lot of local governments would follow that. It would go anywhere from 2.5% to 3.5%. They stopped issuing that in 2022 with inflation going up dramatically. So there are a lot of local governments just kind of scrambling. And then there are some local governments that have specific caps in their ordinance to say even if it's going above, and I don't know if that's true for Palm Coast, but I know it's pretty standard that if you're going to adjust it, most local governments have not been adjusting it for the 10, 15, 20% a year that we've actually seen.
Right.
They've still stayed in line with that 3.5%.
Yeah, I guess my interest in, we did this with the utilities and talking about all of that in terms of pinning it to a specific industry-specific CPI so that you have just kind of automatic updates that don't require another study and things like that. And also kind of mitigate the impact of extraordinary circumstances, right? If you say, we've had huge inflation and so therefore we need to increase our fees, if we had been raising them closer to actual inflation this entire time, potentially we wouldn't have to raise them as much. It would be a softer blow, so to speak. So I just wanted to know if there was a CPI that it's pinned to in order to kind of automatically raise it rather than, you know, us having to look at it every 5 years and kind of capture all that inflation in one big swoop, so to speak.
You know, there is a construction cost index, and that's something a lot of local governments have used. Like so many other things that are happening right now, the legislature is preempting more and more of local governments' abilities to do things. And one of those factors that they've been looking at is without studies, is trying to limit some of those inflationary adjustments. So it's probably something that would have to be looked at in a little bit more detail. Ideally, that would be how you address this going forward. But, you know, there are a lot of local governments that don't want to address impact fee increases every single year of a 10, 15% magnitude, because it does have an impact, but then they bring you to this situation that we are at today, where you're talking 130% increase. I wish I could say there's an easy solution. There probably, where there's a will is a way. But the legislature has been starting to crack down in terms of when you do your studies and how often you update these fees. So it is becoming more and more difficult even to tie it to inflation.
Can I jump in here real quick?
Of course.
So we've asked two questions. What was the increase in 2018, and why? And then Councilman Miller asked a question about what is the authoritative document or process that we've used for the year-to-year increase? You guys haven't been able to answer that. Okay, so that's a due out to us. All right, and especially you, Mr. Paul, that you did this study for us back in 2018, okay? We're asking pretty direct questions because we need to figure out how we're going to proceed moving forward and what the foundational rationale or numbers are. All right, so City Manager, if we can have that as a due out from the staff, please.
Understood.
All right, thank you.
I have another, so I looked up the construction rate of inflation, and it goes anywhere, I think residential is around 3%, non-residential around 3.4%. So the 2.7 isn't terribly off, but we are dealing with a lot of money, so it does add up, obviously. I guess what I'm a little confused about is we have limits, statutory limits, obviously, with regards to what, unless we have extraordinary circumstances, right, that are legally supported. If we come up with a base number that we're going to increase the impact fees by for year one, and then we add this CPI, we'll call it, year after year, do we add, is that CPI in place regardless of the starting point? Or if we say we're going to show extraordinary circumstances, so, and I'm just using this as an example, I don't want anybody to freak out. We're going to go 113% or whatever it may be, year one, and then for the next 4 years until the next impact fee study, that's the rate without the rate of inflation added to it? Or do we still add that rate of inflation even if we go to that extraordinary circumstances figure?
I may attempt to address that. Due to statute, we cannot increase like we had done before. Mm-hmm. So the CPI indexing every year, the 2.7% number was based on that throughout the years. So it averaged about 2.7%. The last one was like 3.9% last year that we indexed that. From now moving forward, you cannot basically increase the fee unless you have conduct a study to do so. After that, you have 4 years to utilize that. And let's say in 2 years, we think that the fee is not in par, mm-hmm. then we have to conduct another study in order for the rate to be increased. So moving forward from now on, we cannot just basically adopt 112%, and then on top of that, every year we add a CPI. We cannot do that based on legislation, yeah.
So based on that, we up here have to contemplate the continuing inflation, continuing inflationary impacts as we decide what the impact fees are going to be over the next 4 years. Is that an appropriate assessment then? Because if we can't automatically put on a CPI like we have in the past, we have to kind of build that into the impact fee that we're going to charge over the next 4 years, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Got it, okay, thank you.
Just to clarify on that, so anything above 50% increase is considered an emergency action. So if we increased it by 10% to 60% increase, would we still be restricted in using the CPI adjustments for the next 4 years? In other words, if we keep it within the rules and say 50%, mm-hmm. we can do the CPI adjustments. Is that what you're saying?
No.
No.
Yeah, the current legislation is basically every time local government wants to basically increase impact fees, you have to conduct a study to justify for that. And once you do that, that's it. It remains.
So if we wanted to do a CPI every year, we would have to do a study every year. That's what you're saying?
Yes, based on legislation.
In accordance with Florida statute?
Yes.
Crazy. Okay.
All right.
That's efficient.
Do you want us to keep going through the presentation?
Sorry. I mean, this is really important, and it's going to apply to all of the, all of the impact fee studies. So it's going to go a little bit slow at the beginning here, but we'll get there. Sorry, please.
It is, and these are all valid questions we have. We have had some local governments that have directed us to say, project out the next 5 years
Yeah.
and include a 5%, adjustment each year, so our cost in 5 years from now reflects 20% inflation. So that's one avenue that you could do. Basically, you're saying your cost, but then when you have some cost increases like we're talking about now, then you're talking about 180% as opposed to 160%.
And in the numbers that you put together, particularly for transportation, because it's well, I guess they all involve construction, but mostly transportation involves construction. In the numbers that you all presented, did you account for inflation in these projections?
As of right now, we're using present-day dollars.
Present day, so you did
Present
not
day.
account for inflation?
We have not accounted for that, given the fact that we're already looking at an increase of a fairly substantial rate. If we were to do that, and we were to adjust for inflation, and we'd look for, say, a 5% or 6% number over the next few years, calculate that already, and then you adopt it in your schedule. So your schedule going forward would have already a fee calculated for 2026, 2027, 2028, and 2029. That's how some local governments have been doing it. Others have said, if we're going to experience this inflation again, we will do another study for that. So, historically, it's been DOT has produced a construction index factor. The state stopped producing that in 2022. Most local governments in Florida referenced that index. Because of whatever issues going on at the state level, the state said, we're not reporting inflation anymore. Now we've gone back and I've started using the National Construction Cost Index, which is another national figure tied to transportation directly. So there has been a lot of changes that are going on back and forth, and the legislature has tried to make this more and more difficult to do. They basically have said, if you're going to update your fees, you have to do a study. Some local governments have said an adjustment for inflation is not an update. That really depends on each local government's legal counsel and the desire of their counsel.
Well, I think if you work it
to
in
do
at the
that.
beginning, though, it's not an update.
If you do that, that's how we've been doing it now,
Right.
is now we've been starting to say, we're going to work it in up front and then go out there.
But that's just an estimate, right? So like.
It is.
Versus the ability to tie it directly to a CPI, you can capture what the actual, to an extent, what the actual costs are that have risen, versus us just guessing and saying, well, our crystal ball says 7% next year.
Can I ask a question on the Florida statute? So when you're, Mr. Fong, when you're referencing the statute that locks us in, that we can't do a CPI down the road, is that effective, the law that goes into effect, what is it, 1 July, or is it current?
That's current.
Okay.
Yeah, July 1st is a different bill that we are basically monitoring. And that one basically defines what extraordinary circumstances is and how you would meet that. Currently, it doesn't basically define what that is, so we have options to justify for that. But if it is passed and signed by the governor, then July 1st, then basically we have to follow the requirement. I think for transportation, we have to qualify 3 out of 5 requirements in order to justify for that.
Okay, so the definition changes?
Yes.
Got it. All right, thank you.
Please go on.
Thank you. So historically, inflation has gone up 2.5% to 3.5% per year, depending on where you are within the state. At the national level, since COVID, it's gone up for construction costs 13 to 15% a year. The state of Florida itself has gone up 20 to 25% a year. Back in 2018, when we did this, the overall cost was roughly $7 million a mile of the projects that had been identified. This go around, it's $14 million a mile. The 2025 number could have been even higher, but since most of the rights of way that we're looking at have been platted and have room, we have not included additional costs for right of way, for stormwater, or for intersections, But as you know, as you've likely gone through any of your projects, right-of-way is often a factor in the construction cost of these improvements. We've also looked at some of the localized data. Historically, design and engineering runs at 35% of construction cost. We've used a 25% construction cost number. So these factors could have been even higher. We've taken a little bit more of a conservative approach, given that inflation has gone up as much as it has. Each of the factors that we look at to update our impact fees have changed or been updated since 2018. The National Household Survey, which gives us travel length data, was updated in 2022. The trip generation manual that references the trip impacts for an individual land use was updated to 11th edition. The long-range transportation plan's been updated. The travel demand model, the capacities that we use to evaluate roadways have been updated. So essentially, all the factors that we look at and all the sources of information that we look at have all changed. And that will come into play as we go through some of the numbers. And there's some land uses that have seen a fairly high increase. Others have seen not as high, and that's largely due to these factors. There are 2 studies that we have performed. One is for the actual impact fee itself, and the second is just detailing the findings, should you all elect to make a finding of extraordinary circumstances, of what some of the facts are that we believe have driven those costs up, and some of the considerations should you adopt a fee higher than what statute allows. And this all came about since you've last updated it. So in 2021, the Florida legislature basically required any increase in an existing fee to be phased in over a multi-year period. If you're increasing it up to 25%, it's phased in over 2 years. Between 25% and 50%, it's phased in over a 4-year period. And you can't exceed 50% above the existing rates, unless you make a finding of extraordinary circumstances. So you all could say, here's our current rate. We're going to stick to statute. So since they all exceed 50%, we would cut them off at the 50% level and phase that increase over 4 years. So if you all elect to not take any action on extraordinary circumstances, but you elect to vote for the study, that is the maximum they could be increased.
Would it have to be phased over 4 years?
If you followed statute, yes, it would have to be. You wouldn't have the choice.
Okay.
So if you make a finding of extraordinary circumstances, it requires 2 public workshops. We had one last week. We'll have another one on Friday. Staff has recommended having this one to you all. There's no limit in terms of how many that you have, but it's to have this level of discussion because especially if you are dealing with increases on that, it's good for you all to know all the factors that go behind it. There is a supermajority vote, so 4 out of the 5 of you would have to vote for this. One of the other factors in the new bill that's passed, coming up, it will be a unanimous vote. So you'll have to have a unanimous vote of your elected officials going forward in the future to make a finding of extraordinary circumstances. This would allow you to adopt.
Pardon me 1 second.
Yeah.
If we can just keep the conversation low, please, so that we can make sure everybody can hear the speaker. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
With a finding of extraordinary circumstances, you can go higher than the 50%. You could either go all the way up to the maximum, or you could go to whatever level that you feel appropriate. You could also elect to do an alternative phase in, voluntarily. So you could say, well, you want to increase these fees up to the maximum level, but we want to do it over a 3-year period, over a 4-year period. That would be your decision at that point under the extraordinary circumstances. And I'm sorry, not as January 1st, 2025, but January 1st, 2026. One of the new factors of the legislation would be a unanimous vote, and then any increase has to be phased in over 2 years. The legislature did talk about a number of other factors, including even eliminating extraordinary circumstances. So in the future, you may not even have this discussion because it may just say that all you can do is a 50% increase. There's a number of factors that we look into in terms of the fees themselves. One is the population growth in the community. Palm Coast has been one of the fastest growing communities in the state of Florida, and we project that trend will continue up to 2050. There's estimates been provided by staff based on some of the state level data available, saying upwards to 157,000 residents within Palm Coast by 2050.
Can we, sorry, I have a question for legal, if I may. On a slide, I don't know, I think it was 2 back, it talked about, it says you could adopt the full increase, but over a multi-year period. And in meetings with staff, I think there was some hesitancy to going that route because there would be a legal challenge to saying we have these extraordinary circumstances, but they're not so extraordinary that we don't need to collect them all up front and we can phase them in. I believe that's correct, right, Fong?
Yes, basically, you are trying to justify the extraordinary circumstances fee. And then you, after that, that you say, okay, we're gonna collect it over the next 4 years and reduce the collection of that increase. That basically, we open up for litigation by justifying extraordinary circumstances. So typically, if you're gonna go for extraordinary circumstances, then we basically should go with the maximum justifiable by the technical report.
Yeah, so I guess my legal question is, if we look at just these impact fees in a silo, and we say we have extraordinary circumstances, and I think from a lot of infrastructure perspectives, we absolutely do. But if we look at them in a silo, we could say, yes, we have extraordinary circumstances, no problem. But then if we're trying to balance other interests, like affordable housing, from a legal perspective, are we permitted to balance those issues, or do we have to look at and I guess the real question is, has the court looked at this and evaluated, is there any, I didn't see any case law on extraordinary circumstances being challenged and then these legal arguments being made, because we as city council can't look at these in a silo. We have to look at how this reverberates in our community and how it can shock the system of affordable housing for an incoming firefighter that makes $49,000 a year.
So to answer your first part of the question, so case law, there's very little case law on this.
Yeah.
So I'll be honest with you, any path you guys go forward, you'd be kind of defining that if someone challenged it, then that would be most likely the case law. So in my research, talking with Fong there and researching that, there's very little case law on this. Like Fong said, you want to go by what you're looking at. You can consider that stuff, I guess. You could try it, but it's going to be a trial and error, unfortunately.
Yeah. I don't feel like being a trailblazer today. I don't know if I want to be a trailblazer on this. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, and Vice Mayor, all these questions you have, this is probably the 10th one of them we've done this year, just extraordinary circumstances. These are all legitimate questions because it was adopted in 2021 by the legislature. There's been no real clear guidance, and except for 2022, the legislature has amended the statute every year. So it's, a little bit like playing whack-a-mole, trying to come up here giving you long-term recommendations. Extraordinary circumstances is completely a Florida legislature creation. There is no case law anywhere that's been documented on that. So that's completely a construct of that. There are a number of local governments, I think if these things continue, maybe it will be worthwhile for them to challenge some of the things on statute. Because some of these are real limitations. In one instance, you have use your most recent localized data, and in the other instance, it says you have 50% cap. So, there are statutory inconsistencies, which is unheard of. It just depends if what you want to be a local government going up against the state of Florida. And most local governments haven't felt that pain yet enough to do that, but, as more and more of them get preempted on the vacation rentals you have, on the land use laws, more and more, you all deal with the direct consequences of that for members of the public. So none of what you're discussing today, we haven't already heard. Some local governments have a very conservative approach legally. Others say we're going to maximize it, the full extraordinary circumstances, just like Fong's recommended. And that ultimately depends on your legal counsel and their level of comfort. So I wish you'd say there's a magic ball and there's all this knowledge that we can pull from. You know, you got some folks coming up behind me, they deal with a lot of the other impact fees. They're dealing with these same instances. And it's really, my role is to give you all at least the information you need to feel comfortable with the decision you're gonna make. But there has been no uniformity in terms of how local governments have addressed this.
But just a real simple question. I've listened to the briefing now a couple of times. The third bullet on this slide says requires supermajority vote of elected officials. And then the next to the last bullet says, as of January 5th, requires a unanimous vote. It phase in over 2 years. So,
It should be 2026.
I think there's a typo, yeah.
okay,
So-
that's what I thought, because I thought we still had
Yeah,
the chance
yeah,
of
you
doing it.
do,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
okay.
Yeah, so if we were to delay this decision till January, then these rules
Right,
would apply to
right.
us then.
But I saw January 1st, 2020. So what are we talking about here? It's already gone by.
I guess when we're talking about the extraordinary circumstances and the phase-in, I guess the reason, in my mind, the reason there may not be any case law is that if you're claiming a large % increase and the opponents of those as kind of a softening blow, you phase it over time, potentially they're not going to sue to correct that decision because they got a softer version of what was going to happen anyways, right? Yeah. So unless they're just trying to completely wipe out the extraordinary circumstances itself, they wouldn't sue. So therefore, there would be no case law, so.
Well, I think that's the issue here is whether or not there are extraordinary circumstances and it's legally defensible. You said you did roughly 10 of these other presentations. Do you know what other cities have gone with? I mean, have they found extraordinary circumstances?
Usually, if they've gone down the path to make the study, they have gone down and done this. There are some local governments, they don't meet the criteria for it. You know, they have average growth, they have regular needs. I'll recommend not to do it because I don't think you can make a finding of it. Palm Coast, you know, you are one of the fastest growing communities in the state. You've been one of the fastest growing. You know, I think just in population alone, my metric I look at is, are you, as a percentage of population, growing faster than the state of Florida, which is pretty extraordinary. You are. There's not, say maybe it's 25, 30 local governments across the state that can make that case. We're doing Cape Corals right now, which is another one of the ITT communities that's extraordinary growth. We're doing Port St. Lucie right now, another extraordinary circumstance case. But we're also doing Altamont in the central Florida, where they have average growth, and we haven't historically recommended it. So it really just depends on what your all's needs are. You know, I think you're gonna have the growth, and I don't see that growth going down anytime in the foreseeable future, and your costs are only going up. So, I mean, but in terms of phasing, some folks have elected to do it, some folks have elected not to. It just really feels what they're comfortable with, and honestly, how much the builders and development community comes out and you know, raises a question on this.
Just another one of my simple questions. On this extraordinary circumstances, I understand the growth part. Is inflation considered an extraordinary circumstance?
Over the past 5 years, I consider it one because it's a reality that we're dealing with. Again, there's not any definition of what's extraordinary. All that we know is historically, costs have gone up 3.5% a year. And in the last 5 or 6 years, they've gone up anywhere from 80% to 130%. That's pretty extraordinary. It's not something that we've dealt with probably as a country since the 70s, when you had a high level of, you know, hyperinflation. But we went through decades, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. You didn't see anything like what we saw the last 5 years. And it doesn't matter, you know, it's eggs, it's food, it's, you know, anything of your daily needs. We've all felt the pain of it, and transportation is just one of those factors as well.
So what are we expecting the inflation rate to be for the next 5 years or 10 years?
I mean, at the national level and the state level, it has leveled off some, but some of the communities I'm running in, it's still running, 5, 6, 7% rates. And the numbers we're seeing now on some of the construction costs, they're $12 to $15 million a mile for a 2-lane road. That 2-lane road would have cost $3 million 5 or 6 years ago. Some of the communities, Port St. Lucie and Cape Coral, some of the 4-laning of roadways, it's $35 million a mile. I mean, these are costs that are getting, extremely high, and, to what level local government's going to continue to absorb this, I don't know. They're going to have to make some real decisions on these growths, but I mean, the one benefit you all have is you do have that right of way, so there's some check in terms of those overall costs, but the inflation and construction costs is real. And you're all competing against a lot of other communities that are growing fast as well.
So I just, for everybody's benefit as we're looking at this, I would say that if in 2018, we now come to 2025, and I don't think we could have anticipated this rate of inflation. But looking forward now, we should anticipate. So I don't know that in when this would be due, we'll say 2030. If we do another impact fee study in 2030, it's less likely that you'll be able to say, oh, and the rate of inflation is an extraordinary circumstance because we've already been experiencing it. But because we didn't experience it previously and then it jumped up the way it did, I would say it now qualifies as an extraordinary circumstance. So probably in the future it may not, but I think for purposes of this study it absolutely does.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. These are all, really good questions. Population, we just use as a metric in terms of transportation. Is your community growing? The real factor we get into is the actual growth or the projected growth in traffic, looking at the model volumes. And here, again, we expect some pretty significant growth in traffic in the community. Between 2023, which is our last sort of round of traffic count data, up to 2050, roughly an increase of 900,000 vehicle miles of travel. So that's, the volume of traffic on the road times the length of the overall road system. So, it's pretty significant growth in terms of traffic demand. We look at existing traffic and, in fact, what are your existing deficiencies on your network. As of right now, your network as a whole has a decent amount of capacity, with the exception of limited access, which is controlled by the state, and that's really not factored into this. But today, your system's operating roughly how it should be. In the future, we project that these several roadways that we've identified would operate below their level of service standard. And these are the corridors looking out to 2050 that we believe, at least on the model data and the traffic data that we have today, would need to be improved. And those include portions of Belterre going from 4 to 6, Matanzas Woods going from 2 to 4, and then a portion of it near the interstate going upwards to 6 lanes. Palm Coast Parkway, portion of it near the interstate going up to 8.
I'm sorry, sorry to interrupt, but the VMC, what is that?
Vehicle miles of capacity. So you
Capacity,
have
okay.
the travel on the roadway is the
Travel
cars
versus
times the length,
capacity.
and then the capacity is the number of lanes, carry so many cars times the length of the roadway.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Some people say it's volume to capacity, which just looks at cars and how many they can handle at say an intersection. We also identify the need for 2 state road projects, State Road 100 to be widened during that time frame, and US Highway 1 portion of that to also need to go to 6 lanes as a part of this overall study. So we do look at city roads. There's not a whole lot of county roads in the area that we've looked at. We also look at county roads and state roads because traffic and development impacts all those corridors. Whether they're a state road, whether they're a city road, or a county road, it's development in your city using that transportation need. So we do look at all those corridors in terms of what's out there. None of these roadways as of today have any specific funding identified in the long-range transportation plan or in the 5-year work program. That's not to say in the future that won't occur, but as of right now, they're not identified for any type of funding today.
I have several questions on these lists of roads. So my first question is, you said these were chosen because these are essentially the main thoroughfare corridors, right?
These are the roadways that are projected to be over capacity by 2050. Does it matter, we look at specific dates, we have, rough estimates of when that would occur, but these are the roadways that we project will be over capacity by that time frame. So that's why they were chosen as corridors to be widened.
And why are we looking at them through 2050 when we know impact fees are looked at every 4 to 5 years?
And typically, we've looked at the 2018, we looked at a 20-year time frame. This is the time frame for the long-range transportation model. So we typically look at a longer time frame in terms of transportation need, because it takes a while to get some of those funds collected. You could look at a shorter time frame. And we did initially. I think there's only 1-2 roads over the next 5 years that need to be widened. But that doesn't necessarily generate a whole lot of funds for that. And I don't necessarily know that certainly making a recommendation of extraordinary circumstances based on 1 road or 2 roads in a 5-year period probably wouldn't be enough justification. Here you have enough of a sample of roadways and enough data going behind it. So most of the transportation corridors that we look at, we do look out over a 20-year period.
And we have, so 100% of impact fee, or I should say 100% of these expansion projects can be paid with impact fees, right, for traffic? And then we have 7 years to use them from the time of collection, right? Okay. So this question is for Fong. Do we anticipate, have we done a chart essentially or an analysis that says based on growth, and if we were to, if council were to approve the recommendation for impact fees to increase I think this one is 113% starting day 1, over the next 4 years, this is what we'll collect. Have we done that analysis to then see what that will translate to in the construction world? So in other words, if the current rate of growth continues and we collect this amount in 4 years, we'll be able to 6-lane Belterre Parkway from East Hampton to Royal Palms. Have we done that analysis?
We have not done that analysis. The reason is that because it's based on absorption rate, because it's based on the historical construction of how many residential, single-family, multi-family units coming in, and that varies from year to year. We could do an average of the last 5 years, for example, and project it out to the next 5 years, just to get a range of collection of the impact fees in order to look at it. But basically what we have done in the past is that every impact fee dollar that we collected, it goes to a separate account. And then that separate account translate into enough dollars in order to do an improvement that's related to capacity improvement. Because we can only use impact fees for capacity improvement only, because that is the intent, is to basically to provide adequate infrastructure for new developments impact. So that's why we cannot use it for anything else. So we have done that. Every dollar that we collected, it remains there, and basically it's going to use for a capital improvement project.
We don't have anything in our impact fee fund right now, right, for traffic?
Very little.
And have we had to,
As we get it.
yeah, have we had to dip into any other funds to make up for what traffic impact has not paid for?
Well, portion of the ad valorem tax that council allocated on an annual basis had a certain millage rate in there that would also go toward capital improvement projects. that if we don't have that,
I don't think that's right, Fong.
oh, we don't have that?
No, Carl shaking his head no in the background. That was sunsetted a long time ago, back in like 2012, I believe.
Okay, so we don't have it?
Let Carl answer for clarity.
Yeah, I don't remember when it ended, but currently in the Transportation Impact Fee Fund, that's been funding itself over a certain number of years. I can't think of a time in recent memory before 2018 or since 2018 that we've used other funds to help supplement the project. We haven't carried a big balance, so using those funds within 7 years has not been an issue. Okay. There's always plenty of capacity projects around the city to do for us to move forward with. So.
Thank you.
And just on this list, since we're looking at this list, State Route 100, right now, they're finishing up an FDOT project. But are we saying that we would, out of our transportation impact fees, we would be looking at changing State Route 100 from a 4-lane road to an 8-lane road between Bulldog Drive and Old Kings Road? That would be our responsibility?
No, what we use these for is these projects give us a cost per mile of roadway improvements. These developments only pay a share of how much they're going to use of the overall capacity that's out there and the cost of that. What these fees are, if, I don't know if you've all done a community development district or a special area district before. So say you have an area of your community that's brand new. You know that there's going to be 2,000 homes there and there's going to be 1 million square feet of commercial. You can identify a network of either resurfacing roads or new roads or infrastructure they need and divide it by those total number of people. Those people would then end up pay their share of that cost of however much that money is. So it's $10 million, they would each pay their share of $10 million. Under a fee, you're looking at what is the cost of the capacity to widen a roadway. If you have one road as your example, that one road could either be too low or it could be really high. So it could either be, it costs you $1,000 per lane mile to do that road, or $200 a lane mile to do that road. When you have a CIP that's based on one corridor, that's all you have it at. When you have 7 or 8 corridors, they tend to give you an average, and that average, in terms of this study, has come out to be about $600 per mile of travel. So then that gets calculated into the impact of an individual land use. So no, you are not expected to pay for these roadways. And no, because this is not driven by a defined development plan, if you have no growth, you don't generate any fees, you don't generate any traffic. If you have moderate growth, you generate moderate impact, and you help pay for that. So it's one way of determining what the fee is itself. What a lot of folks look at is when they see a list of projects, they think, okay, well, all development in the city of Palm Coast has to pay for this list. Well, that's not how we structured the fee. If we knew that there's going to be exactly 50,000 more residents and they were going in this location and you needed these couple of roads to do that, you could divide that number by 50,000. Then every person would have their share of that. But that's not what this is. It's not a special area. It's not a defined area. It's not a master development. It's a city. So the more robust sample of roadways that we have, the more reasonable those costs per mile end up being.
Yeah, I have to challenge you on that a little bit, though, because it seems to me we're using this list to show a need. But to your point, Councilman Sullivan, FDOT is supposed to be responsible for both US 1 and State Route 100. So, or at least giving us a certain portion of funding. Now, I understand that on their plan, if we waited on them, Lord knows what State Route 100 would look like in 10 years. We don't want to probably fully wait on them, but I think it's reasonable to say that we would get funding at least for this. So I know Fong and I had discussed, how would this analysis change if we did get funding from FDOT, and would it lessen our need for in this 10-year future projection? Because I think that it reasonably would.
I have a section where I go into exactly that.
Okay.
question of what we've assumed in terms of funding. And you are correct, Vice Mayor. Any additional funding you allocate, reasonably anticipate, will lower the fee. Any funding you take away will raise the fee. So the fee itself is very sensitive to what the overall cost is for that. And local governments, is it reasonable to think the state would pay for parts of the road? It is. That's not an unreasonable assumption. Could it be 100%? Possibly. Could it be 20%, 50%, what have you? I think there's a wide range of there, but if you wanted to say, as an elected body, we reasonably anticipate FDOT's going to cover X share of these roadways, we could include that into the calculations.
Because I think I did see that, is that the 25 million?
Yeah.
That is, so that's an example of what we did is, because we have state roads in here and we have city roads as well, the city has roughly received from various sources, from the state, from grants, from just one-off type things, about $700,000 a year. We estimated as you continue to grow, as you continue to be larger part of the Volusia Flagler metropolitan area, that number could increase upwards to $1 million.
But that doesn't include the work they've paid for on State Route 100.
Well, what they've done now is resurfacing, so that's not in these costs in terms of
Not a capacity
maintenance.
project.
Right,
It's not
no,
a
I
capacity
understand that,
They
project.
added
yeah.
some lanes. They added some turn lanes.
They did, well, they're in the process, yes, and I think a light too. So I know that there's been some stuff that they've done that we could argue is not capacity related. I agree with you on that, but I'm trying to make sure that what we're doing is legally defensible.
It is. So right now, we've conservatively estimated, 25 million. Some of that money would come from the state, some would come from other sources. If you want to say that we believe a higher share of that should be allocated for the state road projects, say additional 25 million or 30 million or 50% of the cost, you certainly could do that. Again, we don't have a basis for it because it hasn't been something historically done, but it's the definition, is it reasonably anticipated funding? So if you have a state road, do you reasonably anticipate the state to have some share of that cost? That's a reasonable assumption. What share of that? I've seen it anywhere from 10% to 90%. It really just depends on, what your historic track record has been. Right now, this community's probably seen most of the money going to Volusia because it's larger. As you continue to grow, the state share of that could start going more towards the Palm Coast area. So you certainly could give us direction to say, we'd like to make a certain assumption on funding of those state roads. Is it going to happen? Well, 5 years from now, you'll be able to make a decision to say, okay, well, it wasn't this percent, it should be this percent. But as of today, anything you have, I think, so reasonable,
I think that in terms of the state-funded roads, if it's going to happen in the short term, we should not anticipate a high percentage of it coming from state dollars. I think through the normal routes of TPO and those things, getting it on the long-term plan and then moving it up to the short-term plan, we're not there yet, and that takes years and years and years and years. So essentially, if we're going to expect them to mostly fund, say, 100's expansion, then it would be on their timeline and not ours. And I don't think that, the basis is that we're trying to fix these problems before they become bigger problems, right? So if we're anticipating doing these within 10 years, then we should anticipate that we would have to fund them. If we want the state to fund them, then we have to be more patient for that to happen, I think, it's what's realistic, I think.
Well, and it is, we are looking at 20 years. So that's what I'm saying, when you make a reasonable assumption, everything you said is 100% correct. FDOT may not prioritize this for year 15 or year 10. Okay, well, we assume in 10 years, 50% of that cost is going to be covered by the state. It's not an unreasonable assumption. I think it's a reasonable assumption to think, if you said we expect FDOT to fund this in 5 years and fund half of it, that's probably not likely. but going out, because we look at a 20-year time frame.
The difficulty is that for the TPO, it's been on the 20-year plan for 20 years, so, and it's never made it to the 5-year plan, so.
Another,
Getting it prioritized in that way seems to be kind of a very long-term battle, as you mentioned, because of, you know, the way it's structured in terms of Volusia Flagler and things like that.
if I may, Vice Mayor, yeah. Another thing to consider is this. If you look at one of the chart that Jonathan provided, we have capacity right now at 56%. So the other 44% is available capacity. So
On what roads, I'm sorry?
on basically
At a
majority.
network level,
Yeah.
over the
Gotcha.
whole.
Yeah,
the whole city.
on the overall. So what I'm trying to say is this, these roadways have been, you know, projected to be over capacity. For example, 100 from the Hospital Drive entrance to I-95 is currently over the capacity of a 4-lane. So now, it takes a long time for us to collect the impact fees in order to have sufficient dollars for it. But we have to realize that we still have that 44% of open capacity that if development comes in today, they don't have to pay for the impact because capacity is currently available. So you have to wait until capacity is basically no longer available and their project trips the threshold.
Right.
Then we can collect the impact fee, and we only collect the proportionate share of what the cost would do to go from 4-lane to 6-lane or 4-lane to 8-lane. So we collect a portion of that. So in terms of trying to get, let's say, 50%, let's say we anticipate 50% from the FDOT. How and when are we going to collect the other 50% in order to have a project? So that's a question you have to consider as well.
Do we know on what timeline our level of Service D is projected to drop for State Route 100 and US 1, particularly in these areas that you've got listed?
We can get that for you.
Yeah.
It is over the next, it's past the 10-year horizon.
Right.
So
Okay.
it's not tomorrow that's happening. Maybe portions of State 100 closer to the interstate, they're probably more in the immediate term. A little bit further away, they probably are 20. I don't have that right on me, but we can get that information.
I think from
for
our
you.
last traffic count analysis that Fong did, it was failing from the hospital to I-95 on State Road 100, but that was the only segment at that time that was failing on 100.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
As part of the overall calculation, we look at the increase in the capacity from those roadways that goes from 2 lanes to 4 lanes or from 4 lanes to 6 lanes, and that factors into the overall calculation. And then, you know, that's just a pure number from 2 to 4, but then you actually multiply that by the length of the roadway itself, and that gets you the vehicle miles of capacity increase, whereas that number is just assuming a mile to mile. Not all these projects are a mile in length, some of them are longer than a mile in length. And this is getting real detailed into it, but I just kind of wanted to go over each of the factors that we do look at. And so the overall cost of this plan is roughly $160 million in present day numbers. Then we look at all these factors, so you see one of the adjustment
Sorry,
factors.
I'm gonna pump you
Yep.
back to the last slide, because I do want to point out that if we look at the total, and I just did some very rough math, but the total is 157,000. Out of this, State Route 100 and US 1 make up almost like 105,000, or I'm sorry, million. I wish it were 157,000. 157 million, but out of that, these State Route 100 and US 1 projects are 105 million roughly. Out of that, US 1, which I think we're a pretty good ways off from dropping to a level of Service D, is 33 million. So again, my concern is legally defending extraordinary circumstances, and then if we're collecting these, being able to use them within that 7-year period, where would they go? I'm just vocalizing some concerns that I have because it's a workshop. I think I have, State Route 100, I get it, we all are feeling some pain points there, but US 1 is just, I think that's a different ballgame. So I'm just curious as to why that was included in this study.
Because all the factors we've looked at and the current comp plan you all just went through,
Sure.
all the numbers they've looked out to 2050. The long-range transportation
Okay.
plan that's getting ready to be updated is looking out to 2050. So the next cycle for FDOT funding, for state funding, it's going to be looking at the 2025 to 2050 cycle. So all the decisions are going to be made, over that time frame.
I got you. So
it's-
looking out to 2050 is why US 1 popped up on this radar.
Correct.
That makes sense. Okay.
Correct. All right, let's go. And so the question of funding, it's a direct input into the calculation. So you have the cost, you have the funding, and then that gets us a net number. We divide that by the capacity increase of those projects. And then that gets us our rate per vehicle mile of capacity. So when you look at that overall improvement cost and the capacities, sometimes you could have an outlier projects where you only have one or two projects. They could be either really high or really low. When you look at them over 6, 7, 8 projects, it tends to give you a more reasonable number. The reasonably anticipated funding, and just to be clear, there is no funding allocated today. Historically, the city has gotten roughly $700,000. We estimated conservatively, because there are some state roads here, that you likely could receive upwards to $1 million a year on average over the 25-year lifetime of this. Again, that's a conservative assumption. If you wanted to assume a higher level for the state roads, it would directly factor into the calculation. So, if you said, Madam Mayor, I think $105 million. If you said, well, X percentage of that is going to be captured and paid by the state, we take that X percent and add that potentially to that funding, and it would reduce the overall fee calculation.
That 700,000 that we're talking about, that's not including some stuff that's been directly funded by FDOT, right? If, say tomorrow they were gonna do a 6-lane on 100, that wouldn't be a grant to us. They would pay for it and do it, right? So,
In terms of the 700,000, yes, I mean, that's money that's been available to the state, but I think it's money that's come to the
yeah,
city
like, I
through
think
certain
for
earmarks,
say the
correct.
Whiteview project, right? We received a grant to help do the Whiteview project from DOT.
Not work they've done directly.
Right, so that's what I'm saying, that, that 25 million is projected at 1 million a year for the next 25 years. But potentially there's gonna be a reasonable anticipation that we're gonna get 4 million here for, 100 or, a segment of 100, or that wouldn't be a grant and doesn't come into these calculations. So there should be, I think, a little bit more money attributed to some of these roadways coming from the state. I don't know how to define that,
Yeah.
Isn't it true that in the last year and a half, we changed the mileage of roads that in Flagler County that come under TPO responsibility? Remember, there was a decision was made to do that about a year ago. How does that have any impact on anticipated support from the state as far as our roads go?
I'm not sure, I'm not aware of that change.
Oh, you're not?
No, I just joined the TPO board
Okay.
this last month.
Well, for a long time, there were very few roads that came under TPO study. and
Yeah, I know
evaluation.
they're doing a lot of like western
And
county
we-
roads as
We
well.
dramatically changed that.
Right.
About a year ago. So there might be some.
But yeah, to the
some-
point, that
some
would
change there.
further increase potential roads within the cities and stuff like that.
Yeah, Councilman Sullivan, yeah. Basically, last year, the TPO adopted the boundary extension of the TPO to the county's property lines, basically. Prior to that, it's only mainly within the city limits is under the TPO.
Okay.
But that does not have
wouldn't impact us.
any effect on funding from federal or state dollars coming into the county or the city. What it will do is basically, if you are still in the basically called urbanized area, then you will be eligible for a different type of funding. If you're in the rural area, you're still going to be eligible for that type of funding, but
I
it
just say
doesn't
that
change.
there are some changes that have occurred that may help that.
Yeah, and again, so I think there is probably, we should anticipate more than just the, 1 million a year in grant funding. I don't know how to define what that number should be, though. So I'd look to input from others to try to help with that, because I don't want to just guess, right? We should be utilizing some data here to come up with this. Whether it's what proposed costs would be for some of these in the long-term TPO plan or something like that, I'm not sure. But I think it'd be more than just the 1 million a year in grant money.
And just to that matter, I mean, any direction that you all give us will, when we come back with the first reading of the ordinance, it would reflect that. So if you said, assume this much funding or this percentage, we would update these numbers accordingly and then come back to you with those revised numbers.
Thanks. For council, for instance, if there's potential for us to throw in on some of these projects, right, on 100 and things like that, potentially that one of the factors that the TPO uses is like fundability, essentially, whether it's, capable of being funded. If it's a $300 million project, but it's really needed, it gets axed because there's no way to fund $300 million, and they fund the small things first. So if we're capable of throwing in, potentially we can get this stuff moved up higher on the priority list by saying, hey, we'll split it 50-50 or whatever the case may be. So it may, to the point, add to some of that potential funding because we can kind of incentivize them to move it forward in their plan.
Well, I think to that point too, I mean, even if you look at US1 and you look at all of the state appropriations that came to the city for the Loop Road and the impacts that that's going to have on US1, you would think there would be state interest to provide more funding for US1 as well. Again, we don't have a crystal ball, but that just makes sense to me. I mean, if they anticipate this much growth, and this is truly a project of state importance, which I know it is, allowing the mechanisms for other through roads, US1 would be up on that priority list as well.
It's going to add the other, whatever that new road is, 2209?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they may anticipate offloading some of that traffic onto
Well,
that road.
and to that point, I mean, then you would think too that will also relieve pressure from US1. So again, US1 presents an issue to me all around. I have issues with US1 just being on there. I just do not think that is, everything else I 100% agree with. US1, I'm having some issues with.
And we could certainly, if there is a corridor you don't feel, as a unified body, don't feel should be on there, it's always your purview to say, direction to remove it. I will say it doesn't have as big a bang for the buck as you think in terms of additional funding, because one of the factors in the calculation is the increase in capacity. Mm-hmm. So just because you remove US1, you're also removing that capacity addition. So then that assignable cost goes down, but the capacity goes down as well. So that's why, that number still may stay $500, $600. That's what I said, the factor that's the most sensitive that impacts the fee is the funding.
Well, and my goal is not to lower the fee. My goal is to make sure that we can defend this if it's challenged. My goal is to make sure that we are not increasing the ultimate bottom line to our consumer, who's could be that first-time home buyer, unnecessarily, if we don't have to. So I want to make sure that we are getting paid what we should be getting paid for actual growth that's coming to our community. And then wherever those numbers fall, I'll fully support it. But I just think that we have to start from that base of what is realistic and can be reasonably anticipated. So, sorry, we keep holding you up, but
No.
This is a really, really big one.
This first one will have a lot of the questions.
And you'll see one of the options as we go towards the end of this are all these discussions we're having right now. This is our professional recommendation. But ultimately, if there's a project you feel shouldn't be on there, you could direct us to remove it. If there's funding we should be considering, you can provide direction to that. So we'll get into a little bit more into that, but all these are, we're having a discussion now, or we're gonna have it towards the end, but it's all a valid discussion.
So to your point about the change in the VMCR on the basis of US 1.
Yeah.
So just some quick math, the 33,141,456 divided by the VMC increase of 49,875 comes out to like 660. So it wouldn't be an appreciable difference in terms of the rate, so to speak, by removing it, to the point that you made earlier.
You can see, basically, US 1 is one of the bigger projects there, so you would lose $33 million of the funding, but that vehicle mile capacity also comes by
Also
down
drop,
by
sure.
49,000 as well. So if it, just for a matter of policy, you don't think it's appropriate to have that corridor in there, that's certainly a valid, statement. Again, US 1's not failing tomorrow. It's projected to fail at some point in in the future before 2050. So, we'll take whatever directions provided.
No, I agree that I don't think, and obviously we're not looking at all these just in the lifespan of the current rate increase for the impact fees, or a lot of these projects wouldn't be on here. But all these other projects that we're looking at, we can all look at and say, hey, this is already kind of a problem, right, in our community. US 1, I don't feel that's the same way at all. So I agree that potentially we could remove that, just in the interest of making it more defensible, that, it's not a need for 24 years or whatever the case may be. So why include it?
Yeah.
I tend to agree with that.
I agree, we can revisit 4 years from now, or 5 years from now, whenever the next bite of the apple, and look at these impact fees.
Yeah, obviously, we'll get to providing direction here in a little while, but I would like to know, and it can come back simultaneously, but I would like to know when we anticipate US 1 dropping from level of service D based on the current rate of growth. Because if you come back and say, well, we anticipate it'll actually happen in 2030, then I'm going to say, well, then keep that baby in there. But if not, and I don't think it will, I think we're looking out to your point, sir, looking out at because this covers up to 2050, I think we're looking out a pretty good distance, and there are going to be probably 2 and 3 more impact fee studies before that, at least another one before we'll have to start preparing for that. But yeah, it feels like that's kind of the direction that we are going in, but I still would like to see that figure before we make that as a final decision. So, sorry, go ahead.
So all that gets us to the number that we use to calculate the fees. And then each individual land use has its own impact, and that's based on the trip generation of that land use, the vehicle miles of vehicle travel length, how many trips are already on those roadways versus new trips, and then what share of that travel occurs on the interstate system. So all those factor into the calculation of the individual impact fees themselves. And this is actually the primary reason why one number may be 160% and another number may be 71%. Because all the factors that we look at and use, they've been updated since the last update. So I'd say on average, the increase is around 120%. So any one of those numbers, that's really reflecting the pure inflation. Percentages that are lower, it's because the underlying trip generation metrics have likely decreased. Ones that are higher is they've increased during that time frame. And then this is the actual schedule itself, but we actually have specific examples because you really can't see that or make anything reference at this level. So in terms of impact fees themselves, where we are today versus where we're projected to be in the future, should you adopt the fully calculated rates. For a single family home, today they're $3,500 a dwelling unit. Under this scenario, they would go upwards to $8,300. That's a 137% increase. Multifamily is 5,200 per dwelling unit. Today it's 2,000. That's a 160% increase. Part of that is the underlying trip generation itself for multifamily has changed more than single family over the duration from the last study. Place of worship, that 120% number is largely reflecting the increase in inflation itself. It's 5,600 per 1,000 square feet. Today it's 2,500. That's a 124% increase. For private education, which would be K through 12, and also, actually, I think daycare is separate right here, but K through 12 would be 4,600 per 1,000 square feet. Today it's 2,700. So the actually numbers come down a little bit from where you were at previously.
I have a question on the multifamily versus single family. Fong, you've previously told us that single family actually generates less trips per dwelling unit than multifamily, correct?
No.
I think I saw that in the rate study too, that per dwelling unit for multifamily, there's less trips created than a single family.
Per 1,000 square feet, yes,
Yeah.
but not per dwelling unit.
Okay, so it's per 1,000 square feet. Got it. Okay, I wanted to, because I saw that the percentage for multifamily actually went up, even though the amount is obviously still less, the percentage increase went up, so I was a little confused as to why, but that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, some of the fees that we're doing now, where we're going from dwelling unit to square footage, but that's where you have a large number of tear downs or, so we're just getting ready to start off Flagler Beach's mobility fee, and obviously they have a lot of tear downs. So, going to a per square foot rate there makes probably a lot more sense in Palm Coast. Most of your unit sizes are relatively uniform, but they're going from 1,000 square foot tear down to a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot new build. If it's per dwelling unit, they get nothing. At a per square foot rate, they'll get the difference between the two of those. So it's one thing we always look at. Just didn't really seem to be that much variation in household size in Palm Coast today, but in the future, maybe something that you'd look at. But Vice Mayor, you're correct. If you did that per 1,000 square foot, multifamily does generate higher. So, single family home is, say on average 2,000 square feet and it generates 10 trips, so it's 5 trips per 1,000. A multifamily is 6.6 trips per 1,000 square feet. 1,000 square feet. So on a 1,000 square foot basis, it is more generating than a single family. For manufacturing, the rate per 1,000 square feet, and all the non-residential categories are per 1,000 square feet, with the exception of hotels, which are per room. But for the manufacturing per 1,000 square feet, be $4,300. Currently, it's roughly just under $2,000. For a hotel, it'd be $5,400 a room night. Today, it's $2,066. So it's a little bit higher of an increase. For office uses, on a per 1,000 square foot basis, it's going to go up to $10,000. Today it's $4,200. And I will say this question's come up recently a couple of times. Has the shift to home at work or the COVID shifts impacted that? Not in the numbers we have, because we're still using the generation rates that were, I think they got listed in 2000 or 2020, the trip generation rates. So it's possible when they update that manual again, the office rates may reflect somewhat lower rates because of some of the transition to work at home. But right now, the data that we have available to us isn't showing that yet. And for multi-tenant retail, the rates would be $11,200 per 1,000 square feet. Today, they're $5,300. And again, that's a per 1,000 square foot basis. For general retail, which would be like a dollar general type of a use, the rates would go up to $16,000 per 1,000 square feet. Today, they're at $7,700. And for a fast food use, the rates would increase from 23,000 per 1,000 square feet to 55,000. Again, these are all, pretty high percentage increases over the last go-around. And so some of the factors that we've looked at, I personally look at in terms of extraordinary circumstance, and these sort of form my recommendations to a community of whether or not they should or shouldn't move forward. Most people would assume that Florida has pretty extraordinary growth at a statewide level. Even though we're one of the largest populations, we still have one of the largest percentage growths nationally. So one of the metrics I look at is, are you growing faster than the state of Florida historically? And then going forward, are you looking to grow faster than the state of Florida? Other metrics we look at is, what are the costs that we've assumed in the last update versus what they are today? We look at also statewide inflation, national inflation. Should there be any assumptions about funding? And then overall, what of your underlying studies have been updated since the prior period? So historically, over the last 30 years, the city has grown at a much higher rate than the state of Florida. Probably your period of largest growth was between 1990 and 2010, where you're growing over 120% a year, compared to 20% roughly for the state. Over the last few years, it's slowed down a little bit, but it's still higher than the overall state level during that time frame. So you historically have grown faster than the state of Florida. We look at, are you going to continue to grow faster than the state of Florida? And these are using median projections going out to the 2050 time frame. And the state of Florida is projected to grow by roughly 22% during that time. The city of Palm Coast is roughly going to double that of the state of Florida. So you're going to continue to grow in population. You all aren't necessarily urbanized enough where you're going to have rail or mass transit or some other type of transportation that reduces people's need to drive. So that population growth in the immediate future anyways is largely going to have to drive vehicles to get around in the community. We've also looked at what's the overall cost of inflation. When we last did this, we had roughly 20 miles of roadway, and those 20 miles of roadway cost $161 million. In this go-around, we have 10 miles of roadway, or a little over 10, and that cost is $157 million. So basically, in 2018, it was $7.3 million a mile. Today, as of 2025, it is $14.3 million a mile, which is an increase of roughly 95%, just in terms of the actual plan cost itself. And again, that does not include, we do not include right-of-way cost in that. We included a reduced rate for design and construction from 35% to 25%. We did not include utilities or inspection, some of the other factors. So had we gone, at that level, the number was already high. Had we added additional costs to that, the number would have gone even higher. But, those are some of the factors that play into actual construction. At a statewide level itself, we looked at the cost of all the factors back in 2018, and this is just a summary. It goes into a lot more detail in the report. But on average, even the state experienced relatively significant growth just in construction costs, not design, not engineering, not right-of-way, just construction cost of 123% from the numbers that were available in 2018 to those that are available as of 2024. At a national level, the nation takes into account a lot of slower growth areas outside of the Sun Belt and the Florida area. But at a national level, inflation ran at roughly less than 1% construction-wise from 2008 to 2018. Just in the last 6 years alone, it's risen 13.5% a year or roughly 80% since the study was last updated. So I mean, that's, at a national level, that's pretty extraordinary inflationary growth. We did assume, because there are some state roads on here, and because the city has received money in the past, we have made an assumption that, you know, some funds are available. We've actually even gone a little bit above historic norms and said that roughly $1 million per year could be available that time frame. And this helps us just sort of offset the overall fee. All the discussions we've had previously regarding funding, if you reasonably anticipate some more funding from the state, the fee would decrease. If this $25 million number went down, the fee would increase. So the fee itself is very sensitive to availability of funding. And then lastly, in this, under normal circumstances without the inflation, we would largely be talking about these factors. And, you know, so one thing the legislation doesn't capture, what the state was trying to look at is overall cost increases and, you know, big jumps and trying to limit those. But there are things that are oftentimes beyond our control in terms of if new trip generation numbers come out or new trip lengths or new land use comes out. Those are factors that have nothing to do with cost, nothing to do with any policy decision. That's just underlying data. And sometimes some of those will result in a much higher fee. Not often, but sometimes they do. One was multi-tenant retail. They took out grocery stores. So the cost of the retail, I think if you look back, it was 71%. The retail numbers went down, but the shopping centers went up. So the ITE used to say shopping centers were part of that generated 50 trips per thousand. They pulled them out. Now they said they generate 100 trips per thousand. So that was really something reflected, just pure trip generation. But it is one of the factors that goes into why costs do or don't increase. So your options for consideration. You can accept the technical report, and you can say it adequately addresses the background, but we're going to stay with the increase per statute. So that means we would look at whatever the rates are today, we'd increase them by 50%, and we'd phase them in over a 4-year period. So that is certainly within your purview, and that's what statute provides for today. The second option is a lot of the discussion that we've had already. You could amend the list of road projects that we've proposed. You could identify additional funding. You could add projects to it. You know, increasing funding, lowering costs, potentially decrease the overall rate. Removing a project may or may not result in that, just depending on the capacity that's lost. But certainly, any of our projects are recommendations based on what our projected need is. But ultimately, you know, if there was something needed in the next 5 years, we'd likely recommend to you all not to remove that project. And if there's some discussions, I could probably look on my laptop here in a few minutes to figure out when US 1 was projected to go over capacity. But if you wanted to remove something that is a further out project, that's well within your purview to do so. You could accept the technical report, and you can say we want to adopt the fully calculated rates, but we want to phase them in over a different time frame. So we want to phase them in over 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. Your fourth option is you accept the report, accept the extraordinary circumstances. When this actually goes to vote for the 5 of you all, elect to move forward with it, and you'd adopt the rates at the fully calculated number or 100% of the calculated rates. And with that, I'm just going to rehash really quickly. The extraordinary circumstances we looked at is the city's grown historically faster than the state of Florida. It's going to continue to grow faster than the state of Florida over the next 20 plus years. Inflation at a local level, just from our plan and construction costs, has increased over 100%. DOT has experienced great inflation as well, upwards to 123%. The national level, they've experienced significant inflation. We have recommended at least a partial offset to the impact in terms of funding available for projects. And then beyond our control, a lot of the data that we use at a local level has been updated since the last go-around. That's not always the case. It just happens to be so in this one. So one of our recommendations, at least from a technical perspective, would be to adopt the fee in the study. From a technical basis, I don't have any other basis to tell you other than adopting my numbers, because I think that's what is actually reflected. If you all want to make a policy decision in terms of removing some projects or assuming additional funding, that's well within your purview as an elected body to do so. But from a technical perspective, these numbers are accurate. They do reflect the cost of these projects, and we would recommend adopting them at that rate, but we will take whatever direction you all have, and this is a workshop, so before we come back to first reading, any direction you give us, we will update the studies, we'll update the reports, and your ordinance will reflect those. And with that, I complete the presentation, and can open it up, and I can take a look at that
Yeah,
number on US 1.
I know we probably have some more questions, and
Okay.
I'll definitely open up to my colleagues, and then we'll go out to public comment. But yeah, if you could check out US 1 while we're doing this, that would be fantastic. We started down there previously, so I'll start with you, Councilman Miller. Do you have any further questions for the consultant?
No, I don't think so. I think just conversation between us is what I have going forward. So I don't know if we want to start that now.
Oh, go ahead, go for
okay.
it.
Yeah, I think to the point that you were making about trying to make sure that this is as defensible as possible, I do think that there's a little wiggle room in terms of our anticipated alternative funding because of that. I think that's kind of the bare minimum of what we should expect is $1 million a year. But then with potential TPO projects to offset some of those costs and things like that, it would be reasonable to assume that over the next 25 years, we would, receive more than just that $1 million per year. And to the point that you made about, trying to make it defensible, the more accurate we can be with that, I think makes it more defensible. That an argument can't be made that we're excluding potential funding on purpose or things like that in order to reach these thresholds. Right. So I just want to make sure, I don't want to, overestimate how much we're going to get and then leave us in the lurch, but I also want to make sure that we're not being super conservative with it as well, so that it's right kind of in that sweet spot of what is appropriate and reasonable to assume that we would get.
Yeah, I think, just to respond to you, I do think that the $1 million a year would be appropriate if we're removing US 1. If we're not removing US 1, then I could definitely see a potential for more state funding.
I think either way, I don't even, US 1 I don't think is on anybody's radar. It may be in the long-term TPO plan, but I don't think it's even something that anybody's kind of pushing to move up the list in any way, especially when we know 100 is a much bigger need for us right now. Yeah. On the board, if I have any say in it, I would be pushing for 100 and not US 1 in any way. So
we are pushing for 100.
Yes, I am. Yes, but to the point, I think 100 has more of a chance for funding from the TPO board, and so that's kind of where I'm coming from. This $1 million a year for grant money for other projects is fine, but then if we do get any funding for 100 in the next 25 years, which if we don't, that's a big problem, right? I anticipate that to be $10 or $20 million worth of funding, because I think their remill project was like 11 million. So to add, extra lanes all the way down 100 is going to cost way more than that. So the anticipated funding should be 20 or $30 million, because that's what it's going to cost to do. And again, if in the next 25 years we don't have that happen, then there's a whole nother problem happening, because we've just been neglected by FDOT. So I would anticipate that corridor would receive 10, 20, $30 million worth of funding from TPO to increase capacity specifically.
Yeah, just kind of from a different angle. There, old economics 101, you have, the old law of diminishing returns. The question is, we're using the growth figures and all that to anticipate how much money we'll actually get. In other words, no matter what we do at 50%, 100%, 150%, probably if we increase the impact fees by 200%, we would probably have less growth. There would be less houses produced. So there's a sweet spot in there where at what point do the impact fees start to impact growth and how much actual impact money we're going to get? And we can do all these calculations, but you have that other side of it, and I'm not convinced.
Supply and demand curve, right?
Yeah. I'm not convinced at this point. I'm not sure where that number is, and does anybody think that it's not 100%, it's 100% of the study, but the impact fees are going to go up anywhere from 120% to 150%, depending on.
Well, this one said 100, right now they're proposing 137%.
Right.
For
I
single
mean, on
family.
average, okay.
Single family.
Yeah.
family.
So is
But
that,
to
does
your
that,
point-
are we hitting that sweet point where your returns end up being less because because the impact fee becomes.
Because you've slowed growth, right?
Slows growth.
Yeah, and I think some would make the argument that that's their intent, but.
Correct.
I think your point specifically hits home when you're talking about some of these businesses and their impact fees, right? Because we're talking about, we need to bring in commercial and industrial and other things to offset residential tax liability so that business is paying more. We're open for business. We want businesses to come in, and if they see that they're now paying, $11,000 versus $5,000 of impact fees per 1,000 square foot of a large facility, so that's a lot of money.
So I'm kind
it's
of
gonna
at that
impact
point.
those,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm at that point. We do get to renew these things, and, it's it's a long period. It's 4 years between goes. But
And we don't know
I'm
what-
a little leery of beating the whole bullet right now with the fact that in 4 years we'll be able to do it again. And if we do a better
Maybe.
job at looking at it,
Maybe
we might.
in
well,
4 years.
yeah,
We've seen that trending the
depending
opposite
on what
way.
the state does, yeah. But so I know we have to increase the impact fees dramatically, but I'm not convinced we're at the right number yet of where we realistically should go, given other factors.
Sure.
So for me, from a strategic perspective, right, we spent a lot of time on the definition as to whether or not we could defend the term, extraordinary circumstances, per road. I'm fine if we move, US 1 off of it. That's not a big deal. What I think is a big deal is the net effect, right? When we conduct military operations, we have our objective. What are we trying to do? We're trying to ensure that based on our population growth, we have the infrastructure requirements that are needed, right? But the effects of that, overall, from a strategic perspective, what are the known unknowns and the things we just absolutely do not know? And are we going to stunt growth by moving too fast? I don't know. I think about my daughter, freshly graduated from the University of Florida.
Go Gators.
Go Gators. And her ability to be able to, buy a home or move on to another home or whatever the case may be, if these fees are going to be, passed along to the consumer, right? And what is the impact overall for that? And again, we only bring money in if we have that new construction, right? So we can raise them, and then, they won't come. But our projections, based on what Bieber and everybody else is saying, also at the University of Florida, is saying that it will come, right? And so I've got a bunch of different thoughts on whether we're taking into full consideration all the net effects of, a potential, increase. And also, I think it's important. I know we've had some engagement with the city staff has had some engagement with the Home Builders Association. Maybe we need to open it up to other stakeholders to see what their perspective is on this. But that's where I'm at right now. I look forward to listening to public comment.
So, were you able to figure out US 1?
I did, and we look at it in 5-year increments, so it would be between the 2040 and 2045 timeframe. So it's not an immediate
into 15
need.
years.
So it's at least 15 years out.
Okay, so we're not talking about really needing expansion for at least 15 years based on the current growth projections?
Correct.
Okay. I have two main thoughts. So one, I absolutely think that the impact fees need to be raised and steeply raised based on the cost of construction and based on the growth that we've experienced. But I want to make sure that we are starting, like I said, from a foundation that is legally defensible. And so from that perspective, I think US 1 needs to be removed from the study. My other concern is, to your point, Councilman Gambaro, in part, I have a real concern about the affordability of housing for a lot of our workforce. So I reached out to our fire department, I reached out to our teachers, I reached out to our police department, and it's kind of funny. Our incoming teachers and our incoming firefighters actually make very similar salaries. It's like high 40s, 47,000, 49,000, right around there. I think 49,451 was our incoming firefighter. If you look at the average cost of housing now, and let's be honest, and no offense to the builders or developers in the room, but philanthropy is not your business, okay? And so these impact fees will go to the bottom line for the consumer. They usually do. They have to be paid by others up front, but they're going to drop to the bottom line. So right now, if we look at the average single-family detached house in our county, all right, I don't know if it's Palm Coast or the county, but it doesn't, for purposes of today, it doesn't really matter. You're looking at $350,000. An attached single family, so a townhome, would be anywhere from right around $250,000 is the average. A 2-bedroom apartment is $1,850 a month. With some quick and dirty math based on what an amortized mortgage would be, not including taxes, just principal and interest, it would take up, a single family home would take up about 50% of the gross income of an incoming firefighter or a starting teacher. An attached house would be about 28%. Would be about 40%. And an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment, would be 46%. It's recommended that you really spend about 1/3 of your gross income on your housing. So we have a lot of interests that we have to balance. I 100% think that we have extraordinary circumstances. I 100% think that we need to raise these impact fees. If the number comes down to over 100%, then that's what the number comes down to. But let's remove US 1 from the equation. I think we have, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had consensus up here for that, do we not?
Yeah, I'm good with
To remove
that.
US 1? Okay, let's see where those numbers fall. And I really don't know where I'm at with regards to hitting it all at the beginning or phasing it in. From a legally defensible perspective, I have a concern about saying we have extraordinary circumstances, but let's phase it in. I do have a concern with that. So do we want to be the ones that set the precedent or that try to set the precedent? I don't know if we want to do that. I don't know if it's worth that risk. So I look to you all for that discussion, but I absolutely think we have extraordinary circumstances. I absolutely think that they need to be raised. And if it's over 100%, that is what it is. How that kind of shakes out as far as when it'll be charged, that I'm not sure of yet.
Well, I mean, being a trailblazer in this regard, that's a great title in my opinion, but I think we should do it regardless. We just need to do what's best for our community and fight through it. I mean, that's as someone who's assumed a ton of risk in my life, if it's the right thing for the community, let's make a sound decision and then let's drive on. And the consequences are the consequences, but it's in the best interest of our community. And so, but that's where I'm at. I look forward to hearing from the public.
Yeah, Councilman Sullivan.
You know, on the legal side of things, it is true that it's still January 1st, 2026, until the new rules theoretically go into effect. But as far as the legal side goes, if whatever decision we make would conform to the new rules coming, there's a unanimous vote, that kind of thing, that might help the legal situation later on. Because they say, well, at least they tried to look at what was coming up and made the decision in accordance with what's coming.
So let me just chime in. What would, I don't have this new statute in front of me, but the new statute does describe more what extraordinary circumstances are, right?
Yes, yeah.
Can you like give do you have that in front of you that you'd be able to tell Mr. Sullivan?
No, I don't, I'm sorry, yeah.
Maybe we can get that back to you, because I think the new bill does define what extraordinary
Right,
circumstances.
I agree with that.
But
Right now, we don't have to agree to that. What I'm saying is, if we do a unanimous vote and do the 2-year phase-in, 2 years, worrying about what the vice mayor's been talking about, how are we going to hold this up legally?
Right, so I guess the question is,
psychologically, we would be in a little better position.
maybe, I don't have it in front of me, but I would argue from a legal perspective, you have a little more freedom right now because extraordinary circumstances are not defined. Right. So, yeah.
but so on a phased approach like that, I know we would be passing our changes before the law takes effect, but on the second, say ultimately it's decided 100% and we say 50 and 50, right? So that first year, 50 doesn't really go over any legal standard from the state or require extraordinary circumstances. But the second year, now you're going over the 50 threshold because you're adding another 50. If we have this before the law takes effect, would that second 50 be in the clear, or would it be applicable to that new law because it's being incurred afterwards?
So whatever you guys' decision you take regarding this ordinance, that would all be final before the new bill, and that won't change.
I just want to make sure that, that it's not coming back later that, because you only passed the 50% threshold, extraordinary circumstances in that second year, which is after the new law takes effect.
No, it should be by your ordinance. Whatever you guys decide by that ordinance, that's final. Now, if you decide to amend, that would be a different story, after the new law effective.
Right,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah, I also have a concern on the commercial side of things. Some of these fees for the, I'm not really concerned about the big box stores. I mean, it's the cost of doing business. Walmart has plenty of money for impact fees. I'm more concerned with daycares. So if you look at, we already have a dearth of daycares in this county, and they're incredibly expensive. I mean, some people actually don't work because it's cheaper not to work than to pay for daycare, believe it or not. It's insane. But like a daycare, it'll go from 5,700, and this is per 1,000 square feet. It'll go from 5,700 per 1,000 square feet up to over 12,000 per 1,000 square feet. Your average daycare, I'd say, is probably around 3,000 square feet. So, I mean, that's a lot of money. And a lot of these daycares, they're not like big companies. Some of them are little franchises, and then you've got some boutique stores, freestanding stores, things like that. They really go up a lot. And so I just have some concerns, but I think we do have economic development coming before us later today. So I think that we can discuss those and maybe the incentive discussions. But it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Fong, that we can't parse out, we can't say for residential, we'll charge, the full gamut of impact fees, but for non-residential, we're going to cut those guys a break. We can't do that, right? It's all or nothing.
You can't do that.
Right.
You can slash, but you slash evenly.
Right.
And then the second component is that you cannot increase beyond what is technically justified. So those are the two conditions that you cannot exceed.
Yeah, and keep in mind we have two more of these to go through, so this is only one impact fee that will go up. And so when we're talking about some of these kind of, I think, residual impacts, to the end consumer or the end person that we're relying on to bring business into our community. This is just one piece of it. So, yeah, I mean, if you all are ready, we can go out to public comment and then we can.
I've got one question that, actually, you just sparked the question. Fong, on,
Yes, sir.
so if we pass this ordinance, and whatever configuration we decide to move forward with, if we decide to move forward with it, we've also, up here on this dais, we've discussed quite a bit about tax incentives and things of that nature. It's one of our strategic action priorities as we go into budgeting. Can we touch this impact fee as part of a tax incentive going forward? All right, I mean, the reason I'm asking is because I always reference the Nikki Haley model of what she did in South Carolina and bringing Boeing and BMW with huge tax incentives. Puerto Rico does it, right?
Right.
Huge tax incentives. Brevard County with all the weapons manufacturers down there, huge tax incentives. Where do those tax incentives fall, I guess is the question. And do certain commercial projects get breaks? I mean, how does all this play out when we're trying to look at the broader discussion?
Let me give an example. For example, you want to incentivize a certain non-residential project coming into the city.
Right.
Based on the assessment, it basically has to pay $50,000 in transportation impact fees. You say you don't have an option to waive it, but you can have an option to subsidize it. So you have to, if you want to waive that, you have to subsidize it back. You have to take it from, example, from general funding in order to pay for that $50,000 for a particular, project to come into the city, non-residential project to come into the city.
You wouldn't change the impact fees, but you could give a rebate or something of that effect that offsets it.
All right.
And I think Craig plans on covering that in his economic development
Okay.
presentation.
Well, your question sparked my question, so I just wanted to see, just making sure we take a strategic picture as we're looking at all this.
Right.
Okay.
But in terms of incentives, you have other options than just impact fees. You have a variety of other options to incentivize new projects come in or a particular type of area of industry or something like that come in. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we ready to go out to public comment? Public comment, please. Mr. Davis.
Good morning. My name is Jeremy Davis. I'm here today to speak on the proposal to raise impact fees by 100% or more. While I completely agree that growth should pay for itself, we have to be honest about what this would mean for our community. A sudden steep increase like this will drive up housing costs even higher, especially for the essential workers who keep Palm Coast running. Teachers, firefighters, nurses, and skilled tradespeople. These are the people who make our city work, and if they can't afford to live here, we're creating a crisis for our future. Yes, we need growth to contribute its fair share to infrastructure, but raising impact fees this drastically, this quickly, without a phased approach is going to hit working families hard. It's going to push them out of the community they serve. Instead, we need a more balanced plan, one that phases in these fees over time, ensures the money is used for real infrastructure improvements, and holds both developers and the city itself accountable for long-term planning and fair policies. We've seen what happens when growth gets ahead of planning. We've felt the effects of poor infrastructure, rushed approvals, and bad oversight, but we can't fix it by pushing the cost onto the people, pushing the cost onto the people who are already struggling. We need thoughtful solutions that balance growth, affordability, and accountability from all sides, both the builders and the city officials making these decisions. Palm Coast has a chance to set a standard, to show we can plan for the future without leaving anyone behind. I'm asking the council to take that opportunity. Let's do this right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your comment. Any other public comment? Good morning.
Hey, good morning, guys. Robbie Barrick, Integrity Homes. So I'm also obviously a citizen here. I built a house like 2.5 years ago in the F section. Keeping in mind the we already up there, one of the highest impact fees counties in the state of Florida. You know, to the point that Jeremy made, and, you know, to Pontieri, Ms. Pontieri, firefighters, local blue-collar workers, you know, can't afford houses as it is. And yes, we're not philanthropists, but we also don't pocket the hundreds of thousands of dollars you guys assume that we do. We pay local taxes, we pay business taxes, home builders insurance, builders risk. All that takes a huge, you know, bite out of our profit, which I'm not complaining. I work hard and I make a living, but I'm also put myself through the school, the testing, and everything else to become a general contractor. With that knowledge that I do, with what I earned, that costs money, and I charge for it, yes. But the fact of the matter is, you're wiping out a whole, you know, group of people that can't afford houses as it is. So by increasing this amount of money, even though, yeah, the city needs it because of lack of planning and collection from decades beforehand, you're about to penalize a whole group of people. And I'm licensed in 3 counties. And it's not a threat that I'm going to take my business elsewhere. It's just a matter of numbers. If somebody's moving into Palm Coast and they look at the numbers, they say, Robbie, can you build somewhere else that's more affordable? Absolutely, I'm going to do that because I can save them money and I make money. I don't want to do that. I want to promote the city of Palm Coast, but you're going to force my hand, and I'm going to go to the county and anywhere else I can build if you guys make it unaffordable for my customers that have to pay 50% of their income to a house and be house poor. What does it matter if they live here if they can't afford anything? You know, they can't afford to go out to dinner. They can't afford to take their kids to Disney or anywhere else because they're house poor. And that's what's going to happen here. You guys are going to drive them into a different county and a different municipality that cares more about affordable housing because you're going to run them right out of here. And guess where I'm going to go? I'm going to lead them right with me.
Thank you for your comment, sir. Good morning, Ms. Henry.
Hi, Denise Henry, Palm Coast. Just since you mentioned tax incentives, I just want to mention this. I'm from Southwest Pennsylvania, and they gave tax incentives for 5 years to Chrysler to come and build a huge plant. 5 years was up, they abandoned the plant. They sold, then Volkswagen came in, took over the plant. Same thing, gave them 5 years. Then 5 years is up, they left, and then they had to start subdividing the building. So I just want to mention that that doesn't always work.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. McDonald.
Morning, Council. Dennis McDonald. I think the problem you're looking at is a lot bigger than just here in Palm Coast and Flagler County. From my perspective, I've been watching this for 25 years. The legislature has gone and precipitated what I consider to be one of the biggest scams I've ever seen in my life, and that's called impact fees. Okay? They're not doing it just to Palm Coast and to Flagler County. They're doing it everywhere. Okay? They continually take your home rule away. They continue to limit what extraordinary circumstances are. I mean, it's going to get to the point that, you know, why even bother to have a city council with what's going on? You have no individual authority what's going on with your legislature. And the people that have represented us have just added to it. Okay, I mean that at the state level. Okay, we've had horrible representation in that. But so what we're getting here is we're kind of getting a double whammy. The state has been rolling at this thing for 25 years or more. Okay, and on top of it, we are in a city that was created by a developer. That developer had their hands on the wheel, we'll all have to admit, for at least 10 or 12 years after the city opened, okay? And then there are other stakeholders that were here that are associated with that, okay, that had their hand on the wheel. I think we're now maybe at a point where we've got enough people that have moved here and say, I've had enough, okay, we've got to fix this. And so I think you have to look at the big picture as to where we're going, okay? We are, what you're talking about doing is you're not competing with other counties. Other counties are in the same mess that we're in right now. It's the legislature. And so, You know, I look at what's being discussed right now about this, what I consider to be a complete ruse on getting rid of property taxes. Seriously, think about that. Why are we talking about getting rid of property taxes? It's because these guys in the legislature have got such a mess running here in this state that they've got to come up with something new. So the bottom line is everybody's getting hit with this, and if you don't increase the impact fees, okay, then every other taxpayer or every taxpayer in this county gets hit with it. We all get hit with it. So either we have to step up and take care of what didn't get taken care of in the first 25 years of the city's existence, you know, or we're just going to go on to being in trouble. What I was going to make a point of, you remember when the legislature gave us $84 million for the loop road on the west side? That was the big deal. You know, they were going to give us $84 million. With this gentleman's number, what's $84 million buy you in today's world? And by the time that road actually gets built, what's $84 million going to buy you then? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Ms. Long. Good morning.
Good morning. Anna Maria Long, Executive Officer of Flagler HBA and 35-year resident of Palm Coast with a solid 50 left to go. It's actually ironic, in our opinion, for the building community to argue against an overreaching impact fee and a false claim of extraordinary circumstances because it's a false narrative that builders pay the impact fees. We write the check up front, but all those costs get passed along to the buyer or renter. They pay every penny, plus financing in most cases over 30 years. Nationally, an increase of just $1,000 to a home prices out over 115,000 potential home buyers. That's a national number, so you could math that out to local numbers. Higher impact fees kill housing affordability, lead to reduced housing supply, which, as we learned in 2020, just drives up the costs of homes. It discourages commercial development, which is tragic for our already unbalanced tax base, so it'll continue to put the burden on the residential taxpayers. And I'll be honest, the building community would not come out of this completely unscathed. Hiring, especially in the trades, would be reduced, and small and mid-sized builders would be disproportionately affected. But the city would also suffer, mainly by local tax revenue growth, the lack of incoming commercial growth to diversify our tax base, and the legacy costs involved in maintaining roads. The goal of impact fees is to ensure that growth pays for growth, obviously. But with these high increases, the lack of legal justification to meet the extraordinary circumstance threshold, and several adjustments needed to the study, as council you all pointed out, these fees will choke off the very growth they intend to support. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any further public comment? Good morning, Mr. Webb.
Mark Webb, Palm Coast. So, as you know, I get texts from people that are paying attention. They have a couple of questions. They couldn't be here. The first question is, in Palm Coast, when are impact fees charged to the builder? The second question is, would, as Mr. McDonald is suggesting, if our reduction or removal of property taxes would to be applied, would that be considered an extraordinary circumstance to justify the raising of impact fees to support the growth and the needs of Palm Coast? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any further public comment? Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Tony Amaral, City of Palm Coast. I am a builder, small business owner, and I've been here for 42 years. I want to thank all of you, first of all, because you guys were handed 200 plus pages for all these impact fees on, I believe, Monday of last week, and you've gone through it, and you've heard everything, you've worked on it. The public, at least, we have not received all of the information that supports the impact fees. but that's a project for another day. I'm kind of concerned how today we are sitting here a week before a first reading, and we're trying to finalize data that will be presented at that first reading. It's a concern because it took so long to get the information we have now. You guys had to digest it over a holiday weekend and then come here and make questions that made sense. So I do have lots of questions that kind of came up with this. First of all, how much is in our current transportation impact fee fund? How much has been spent in the last 5 to 7 years? That should give us a more localized representation of what it costs per mile, because that's what the study says we should have done, but we've been using national data, not localized data. Also, as brought up, why are we footing the bill for US 1 and for State Road 100? Is there an anticipation of returning that, getting that money returned to us later on through the state that would offset the current costs, but we're paying for them now? And more importantly, the fact that was a very good point was we still have 44% capacity that has been paid through for the last 20 plus years since we've been collecting impact fees. I understand we're going to need impact fees. I'm not here to say we need to get rid of them. You probably even do need to increase them slightly. But the fact that you're trying to make an extraordinary circumstance out of this situation doesn't fit well with me, because the simple fact, we have 44% capacity. Impact fees have been paying to increase our capacity. We sit here today in a good position, as was stated by staff, that we have capacity on the majority of the stuff. The state roads are the ones that are not keeping up with us. And with that, just again, I don't believe in the extraordinary circumstance. I do believe we do need to collect impact fees. Never going to say we don't need to collect the impact fees. But we do need to do it in a measured manner so we don't have the quick drop off. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any other further public comment? Okay, with that, we'll bring it back to the dais. I have a few follow-up questions based on public comment, but I'll defer to you all first. Councilman Gambaro, anything?
Yeah, I'd like to get an answer on the questions that Mr. Webb asked, reference. I know one of them, last week we passed adherence to the utility standard operating procedure where we would charge those fees up front, right? But to the other two questions.
Well, just for clarity, Ray, can you come up and give an overview? Because there's several different types of fees that are paid throughout the development process. There's development fees, then there's impact fees based off before a house is issued a CO that they have to pay for. So, Ray, can you just go through the various fees and when they're collected, please?
Thank you.
Ray Tyner, Deputy Director of Community Development. Good afternoon, council members. We have, as far as impact fees are paid at the time of building permit. That's when they're paid. And we have, what we're talking about now is transportation impact fees. We also have park impact fees. You're going to hear a presentation on that shortly. We also have fire impact fees as well. And then separate from us, it's kind of like a pass-through, is you also have schools. Flagler Schools has their impact fees as well.
And then development has fees as well?
Yeah, development has fees as well. You have capacity fees on the water and the utilities, sewer and water, wastewater. They have their separate fees as well that need to be paid prior to horizontal construction of a site as well. And I think I covered most of our...
Does that help answer the question, Mr. Gambaro?
Yes, okay. And then how much of the, so to Mr. Amaril's question, how much of the funding on the local transportation fund, how much are we bringing in? And what do our expenditures look like if we could? I think it's a great question.
Thank you, Mr. Tyner.
Thank you. And I think he made a great point also on the capacity. Ms. Henry, excellent point on tax incentives. My family is from Puerto Rico. We grew up with Eli Lilly, Pfizer. They came in under a huge tax umbrella, and even Ford Motor Company, right? And they all left after 5 to 10 years. I think that's something that we should look at kind of maybe putting our hooks into a commercial entity that wants to do that, if we provide incentives, and there's certain things that we'll expect from them going forward. But I thought that was a fantastic point, because I've seen it as well. That's all I have as far as public comment on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Sullivan?
Yeah, just on that question, the first question is how much is in the transportation fund, but it would be kind of how much is in the transportation fund that isn't specifically already allocated to products.
I think we heard that number was 0 right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, is that correct? So.
I think City Manager has been trying to get that number for
Yes,
us.
that information was discussed with you at your 10-year CIP budget, which we had in March. And those spreadsheets are pretty up to date. And then also for transparency, in our financial transparency dashboard is our annual comprehensive financial report. And on page 136 is the transportation impact fee fund information.
Okay, so the answer to that is 0. The question is how much kind of is not already allocated directly.
Lauren, what is that reading right now?
I wasn't here in March, is my problem.
I will get you a print off of the 10-year CIP, but in the transportation impact fee fund that was as of September 30th I'm sorry, Carl's coming up. Do you have something else?
We've had a few projects this year that used impact fees. Whiteview was our most recent one. We have Belterre Parkway improvements that's out to bid now. That's mostly state appropriation, but there will be some impact fee funds tied to that, and the design update was using those fees. And then we also have Oak Kings Road Phase 2 that we're wrapping up design. We're in an FPL to finish up an overhead distribution redesign. And that has an appropriation too, but the project cost is going to be above the appropriation amount, so there'll be some impact fees that are tied to that project. And as part of the Loop Road project, the previous year's appropriation had a city match of $6.5 million tied to it, where if you add that in, we're in the negative. So we don't have enough to cover just those projects in the impact fee fund now.
That we're currently planning.
Right, because the fund balance as of September 30th was around $9 million. So whatever's not spent that year, then it rolls into the next year's fund. So the fund balance ending in $9 million from September 30th.
Councilman Miller?
No, I was just going to add to Councilman Gambaro's point that there definitely are incentive chasers in terms of companies that come use the incentives for a set number of years and then walk away and go find another town that gives incentives, and they just keep doing that. So we definitely need to be cognizant of that when we're trying to support and grow business, but also not be taken advantage of. So thanks for that point. I think everything else that I was going to comment on has kind of been touched on by everybody else, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you. I did not see in this presentation where we land currently amongst comparable cities as far as how much our impact fees are compared to other cities. I saw it in I don't know if it was a fire or park, so I saw it in other presentations for today, but not this one.
Yeah, we did not include that, but Jonathan may be able to provide some areas that he had done in other jurisdictions.
Okay. While he's looking for that, can we just confirm, I thought I saw that localized data was used to the extent it could be in this report, correct?
Yeah, the localized data mainly related to the road construction cost per mile. So it went from 2018, 7 million to now is over 14 million, so almost double.
Okay.
And that's the localized data.
Okay.
The other one, basically the national survey, household survey, basically that's what we, in the industry, that's what we use in terms of, depends on the land use, how many miles basically they travel from home to work or from home to shops or something like that. That is based on the national survey data.
Got it. So construction costs localized, correct?
Yes, the construction cost is localized, correct.
Perfect. And then I want to just confirm this. In this study, we did not we did not take into account the inflationary cost of construction. I think he said it seems to be leveling out, but in the cost of construction for roads, we did not assume a certain rate of inflation, did we?
That's correct. We did not assume that at all. We used current estimates for today's dollar.
So if there is still inflation, we're going to be essentially absorbing that rate of inflation in whatever we collect.
Which
Correct.
there's never negative inflation.
There's never negative inflation, correct. And it's either going to be level or more than likely it will go up a little bit.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I think the only other question I had then was, I brought this up and somebody else, I think it was Mr. Amaral brought this up as well. 44% capacity is still remaining. We're at 56%, I think. And was that on average on all of these roads, or how did you come up with that figure?
Yeah, Jonathan can provide some additional details, but basically that's an overall citywide capacity that we have available. It doesn't mean that every roadway has 44% available capacity.
Okay.
It means that overall, in terms of the distance and the volume traveled through our roadway system, has available about 44% in capacity.
And a lot of that will be potentially used up by the time 2050 comes around.
Sure.
So, it's a snapshot today. It's kind of an interesting thing with the legislature needing case law. You can't charge when you have deficiencies. So
When
if
you
you
have
don't,
what? I'm
if
sorry?
you
can't-
cannot charge when you have deficiencies. So you can't wait until the moment where your roads fail on a network basis and start to charge for them. You actually have to keep up with it. So the idea of that, you have capacity available, so you don't charge a fee, well, that's actually counterintuitive, because by the time you get to the point where you've used capacity, you can't legally charge an existing development for your system-wide deficiencies. And then we do expect that the vast majority of that capacity that is available between now and 2050 would be used up. If not, we'd actually probably have even more projects that we'd identify on the overall list of needs.
Does the capacity level correlate at all with level of service D, or is that a,
It is based on level of service D standard.
Okay.
I think, the interstate really doesn't factor into it. I think the northern limits of it may go down to C, but within Palm Coast, it is a level of service D standard.
got it. And what does that percentage have to go up to then drop us out of level of service D? Do we know that?
Well, it varies for each road. So each roadway has a capacity. I think for like a 2-lane road, it's roughly 18,000 trips a day. So once it goes above that, that means it's no longer over capacity. For a 4-lane road, it's around 33,000. So once those volumes go above that, then it triggers a need to be widened to 6 lanes.
Okay. And you're looking up where we are right now amongst other comparable cities, correct?
I am taking a quick look at that.
Okay. All right, so we have some decisions to make here. And that's as far as what we're going to do when we implement these actual impact fees. I guess the first question is, are we comfortable with saying that there are extraordinary circumstances and we're going to go over that 50% threshold? Or are we not comfortable saying that and sticking to the 50% threshold?
Is that including inflation?
Well,
we have to build that in, right? Based on what Mr. Fong said.
I think what they said was if we were to cap it at 50%, we then could impose the normal rate of inflation, right? Is that correct, Fong?
Both ways you can include the inflation per year.
We can include it in our rate, but we can't tie it to like an automatic escalation.
That's correct, right? Yes.
Yes.
Say that again, sorry, I don't
Like,
understand.
say if the recommendation was 100% without inflation in it, and we say to ourselves, well, we anticipate 15% inflation over the next 4 years, and we say, okay, we would like 115%.
Got it, okay.
But I'm pretty sure we can't exceed the recommendation, right?
That's correct.
So if we were going to take say like a diplomatic approach and say the recommendation's 100 and it's 50, and we go with 50 to try to, ensure commercial can continue to grow and things like that. But then we say, okay, let's build in 15% on top of the 50. So 65 is we could do it that way, but we can't exceed the 100% of the recommendation.
Okay,
just on the basis.
so that example would not be an extraordinary increase?
It would, because it would still be over the.
Oh, that's what I'm trying to understand.
So we either have to say, we accept the study, but we're going to cap it at 50% and then phase it over 4 years. Or we say there's extraordinary circumstances, we accept the study and we decide what percentage increase we're going to have. But I don't think we can do 50% plus inflation after that, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would assume that
Yeah.
would still be against state law.
Because I think that's what we were able to do previously, but we can't do that anymore.
That's correct. Yes,
Right.
correct. Well, one of the other factor that drive the costs for transportation improvement is that we never consider stormwater pond sites. We don't have that in our justification. We only include 25% for design, but there's also CEI, and those things basically will drive up the cost beyond the construction cost. So you may want to consider that as added to the cost that we justify, and then project it out.
Is that not already captured in our impact fees for stormwater?
It is not captured in our impact fee.
Oh, there's not a
It's
stormwater
only
impact fee.
construction costs, right? Yeah.
So I'm happy to accept the report, but I also want to listen to the other presentations and take into the totality of all the impact fees as we look at, what are the strategic effects and impacts on our housing community?
Yeah, I mean,
residential and commercial.
The commercial is a huge aspect.
It's not clear to me, the strategic impact, and we've received input from some of our stakeholders, but what does that number look like? I mean, what do we project that effect to be? And I'm not clear, I'm not sure we have an answer on that. For me, that's a decision point.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I'd also like to see, I mentioned it before, but potentially adding to the assumed additional funding a little bit there to try to make it more accurate, so that whatever we decide, if it's above 50%, we can justify it. But to the point about impact in terms of commercial and stuff like that, I think I agree that I accept that this is extraordinary circumstances, but then we need to talk about and figure out where that sweet spot is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just so that we're clear, and sorry.
Speak, but I think I accept the extraordinary circumstances. I do think there are other factors other than the technical study that was done. I think that the study is good. It makes valid points, but I think the other factors, as I indicated before, will have an impact on the total amount. And I don't know what that number is. I think it's almost impossible to understand where growth is going to actually be, and at what point diminishing returns. In other words, there is a point at which that would happen. I'm not sure where that is, but I have some feelings about that anyway. But it's going to be above 50, but I'm not sure where it goes. What we end up with as the actual number. And I think we need to do it. Before we can't wait too long on this, because of the rules are going to change on us, as I indicated before. Okay.
Yeah, I kind of want to set commercial aside, because I think that we can, I share your concerns about commercial, obviously. I have this spreadsheet full of nothing but commercial, has a ton of notes on it because of my concerns on what the impact fees will do to commercial. But I think we can provide some type of incentive package to commercial businesses in some way to try to relieve this pressure. I will tell you, if we took all three studies at face value right now and base the future impact fees on them, I totaled them up, and
Almost $6,000.
no. So for single-family residential per dwelling unit, it would go, this is fire, parks and rec, and traffic, sorry, traffic currently. It goes from $5,764 up to $12,771 per dwelling unit. For multifamily, it would go from $4,280.52 to $9,763 per dwelling unit. And then for commercial, it varies because there's so many different commercial, but I use the retail figure. And so for commercial, it would go from $4,937 to $11,387. So you're talking about more than double. And this is per, that one's per 1,000 square feet, and then the others are per dwelling unit. So they're all three going up quite a bit. So I'm totally fine with waiting until the end for the final direction on all three of these. But I'm a little nervous about adding to the anticipated funding because we just don't know. And if you take out 100, which again, I mean, I saw my issues with keeping 100 in here. If you take out what we might get for 100, we've only gotten $700,000 a year, according to staff, for the other projects. So to even say $1 million to me is.
No, and I got you for that, but what I'm saying is that if those are included, then we need to anticipate that we will receive some funding in the 25-year plan. I think it's probably a 0% chance that we receive zero funding.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's fair.
you know, whether that's the expectation that, okay, adding a lane down the stretch, okay, what does that cost? 20 million, 25 million? That's probably what we should expect for funding. If we're going to push it forward, then maybe less funding because we're going to be sharing some of that burden. So I think it's important to have our best foot forward in terms of a real number there, because otherwise that can be something that's attacked.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. If we're going to keep 100 in, let's go ahead and increase it. I mean, what do we say? What do we think is a fair number, though?
I have no idea what that would cost. I know it's not going to be cheap. Like I said, the milling and resurfacing was like $11 million, I think, is what they funded.
Just to do that.
It's generally a share of the cost, so it'd be, again, I've seen anywhere from 10% to 90%. So you could say half of the cost of the road, 25% of the cost of the road, 30% of the cost of the road. I don't know if there's an exact science, but you're right. If you were asking for it 5 years from now, you probably couldn't say, you know, we expect you to fund all of it.
Right.
You know, but the further out, after 10 years, maybe half the
I think
cost.
that's going to be the trade-off there with us is if we're prioritizing it, we're going to have to bear more of the cost, you know, faster than what their plan is.
Yeah.
But to the point, there should be a reasonable estimate of what that should cost, and we should include that in the additional funding sources, I think, just to make sure that it's buttoned up really tight, that we're not leaving that out on purpose or anything like that. You know, it should be what we reasonably expect. And over 25 years, I think it's reasonable to expect some funding there.
Yeah, State Route 100 looks to, according to their estimated, the estimated improved cost is about 70 million.
Yep.
So, I mean, if you say.
I'm not saying all of that.
No, certainly not. But if you said maybe a third, and I see you, I'm coming back to you, I promise. If you said maybe a third, you're looking at, you know, I mean, not even another 25 million for just State Route 100. So, I mean, would you all think it's reasonable to, because we have to give direction to staff, do you think it would be reasonable to say, let's increase the anticipated funding number to 50 million?
I think doubling it, because I think 25 is close to probably what it will cost in terms of their funding. I don't know how much we're going to have to throw into, but I think that's reasonable. You know, I wouldn't say 70 and I wouldn't say 0, so somewhere in between is probably right.
Okay.
Just on the general question you had, phase funding versus one-time increase. We didn't really agree on that.
Well, I think to Councilman Gambaro's point, I think that's one of those things that maybe after we listen to all three impact fee studies, we kind of come back to how are we going to address all three. We don't have to address all three exactly the same.
Right.
But once we kind of get a bigger picture of the total impact of our decisions today, might be a little bit better. City Manager, did you want to chime in? You look like you had something.
Well, I was just going to say procedurally, while it is great to kind of get your consensus and direction for what needs to be on the ordinance for first read next week, but second reading is where it needs to be final. So if there's any changes between first and second reading, that's okay, but second reading is final.
We have time to iron some more out.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So just to kind of sum up what we've heard is that we're not necessarily making a decision right now, maybe come back at the closer to the, after the other presentations have been heard. But we're removing US 1, we're adding the contribution for state dollars to doubling it to 50 million. And then I have a comeback of where we fall with other impact fees, or other cities for this transportation impact fee. It is noted on fire and parks and rec, but not this one. Was there anything else that I missed?
Just the one due out, because I think Mr. Paul answered the question during the course of our discussion, but what was the percentage increase in 2018? I think the Vice Mayor asked that as a point of comparison as we kind of look at the overall picture.
It did not meet extraordinary circumstances, right? So we know it's at least lower than 50%.
Extraordinary didn't exist at that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
The definition of it was different.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Okay, anything else on this?
No, I'll just tell you that I emailed all of you the full impact fee schedule that is adopted right now for the various funds that we have. And then if you'll recall, we're also a pass-through for Flagler County for library, EMS, and law enforcement. And then the school district has their own. And so it breaks down our impact fees, those other utility fees, et cetera, in that booklet in your email.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to the next presentation. I believe we're looking at fire. So,
Item 2.
Item 2, yes, yes. Moving along at a snail's pace this morning. Ordinance 2, this is item E2. Ordinance 2025, amending Chapter 29 Impact Fees, Article 4, Fire and Rescue Impact Fees, Code of Ordinances of the City of Palm Coast to adjust rates based on a comprehensive study, including an extraordinary circumstances study.
And not to break it up before that we get started on this one, lunch is ready. So if you wanted to break now or break after fire, it's at your convenience.
Are you all okay with going through fire?
I'm good to power through.
Yeah, let's power through fire and then we'll break for
okay.
lunch. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Gibo, good morning.
Good
Barely.
morning. Morning, afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Council, Vice Mayor. I'm Eric Gibo, architect with the Stormwater and Engineering Department, and I'm here with our consultant, Sean Ocasio from Raftalis, as well as Carl Cody, the Director of Stormwater and Engineering, and we are here to present the findings of the Fire Impact Fee Study. I'll briefly discuss the background behind the development of the fee study, projects in the CIP that were used in the analysis of the rate determination, and then I'll turn it over to Sean to present the findings of the study. The Fire Department continually tracks call volumes and response times and uses this information to assess and identify future needs. The city has adopted a level of service for the Fire Department to respond to a call within 7 minutes, 85% of the time. The response time is critical in severity of fire propagation and the survival rate after a cardiac arrest. The map on the left shows call volumes and response times. The green dots are meeting the response times, while the other colors exceed the 7 minutes. The 10-year plan has identified new station locations to meet level of service, as well as providing a fire station within 5 miles, which will lower homeowners' insurance rates. At this point, I'd like to take you through the projects that evolved from the Fire Service's 10-year plan and response time study and what make up the basis for the rate study. New Fire Station 22 on Palm Coast Parkway replaces the existing station just adjacent to the community center. The current 3,000 square foot fire station was built in 1977 and can no longer serve the needs of the fire department. Improvements and maintenance over time could not adequately address the functional and firefighter health safety issues associated with the building. Additionally, customized apparatus was required due to the size of the bays. The 10,000 square foot station located just east of the existing station is currently under construction and is utilizing $3.5 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds. It's scheduled to be completed early next year. New Fire Station 26. A fire station location study was performed in 2020 to determine the most effective site to achieve the required reduced response times.
With anticipated development in the area south of State Road 100 and east of Belterre and the proposed extension of Citation Boulevard, a site was selected for the new Fire Station 26 on a site located on Seminole Woods. As with 22, the project is currently under construction with completion in 2026. This project received $5 million in state appropriation. The study referenced in the previous slide also identified locations within the city that will experience increased response times due to the 10-year growth in the northern part of the city. In addition to the existing Fire Station 23, would increase the service capacity and operation and safety efficiency in the B section and along Belterre Parkway. And a new mini station along Whiteview would support the existing facilities in the city's central region. So in summary, this slide identifies the 10-year CIP projects presented along with their respective costs, totaling roughly $46 million. Completion of these projects will allow the city to continue to provide its citizens with the high level of service they have come to expect. Since existing residents will also benefit from the new facility capacity fees, and will only be utilized for a proportion of the new dwelling units. Currently, this equates to existing residents funding 46.7% of the project costs. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Sean with Raftelis to present the findings of the study.
And, I'm just going to jump in here for a quick second. Just because there was a question from the last presentation, the 10-year projects do include inflation costs at 3% per year. So the inflation costs are built into the 10-year projects here because we know that's what we're trying to fund.
Thank you for that clarification. So for the projects that are included, you all have already included inflation in the cost for those? Yes. Perfect.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Sean Ocasio. I'm a senior manager with Raftelis Financial Consultants. I've been the project manager on the two studies with the city for the fire impact fee study as well as the Parks and Recreation analysis. Just a little bit of history. I've been working with the city for actually a while. I participated on the past two impact fee analyses as a lead analyst under Murray Hamilton and Henry Thomas. Some of you may remember him, and I believe Murray's working with you on some utility-related items. So we're all on the same team here. Murray wasn't able to attend this morning, so he has me here in his stead. One thing I wanted to mention, in terms of my experience with impact fees, I've been working, formerly with PRMG, now in our current form as Raftelis for about a little over 15 years now. And so this is an area that we have quite a bit of experience in terms of development of fees for the first-time implementation, updating of existing fees, which is what the case we're doing in this instance for the two studies, and method adjustments and things like that. So one thing I wanted to mention on the front end, the presentation this morning, or I guess afternoon now, covers a little bit of background on impact fee, impact fee law and rules. We're going to then jump into major assumptions in the analyses for fire and then subsequently for recreation, and then the recommended fee levels and potential considerations for implementation, similarly to what was discussed previously. So one thing you'll find through the course of this presentation and then the following one for recreation is you're going to see a lot of similar musical notes in terms of what's being talked about, because a lot of the concepts are shared between what was discussed in transportation as to what's going to be part of fire and recreation here. One thing I also did want to mention on the front end is when it comes to the design of these types of fees, there's a few different ways that you can calculate them in terms of how you're calculating the costs that are to be recovered as a part of the impact fee analysis. You have some flexibility as to how you implement the increases, and you have some flexibility as to how you actually apply the fees. So there's some flexibility there that you have. And so for the purposes of our analysis, you can look at the cost side, if you will, because at the end of the day, what we're designing is a cost on a per unit basis. We're looking at the cost. You can look at it, on a historical basis, what you've invested historically in, let's say in this case, the fire department and its related assets and apparatus. You can design fees looking on a forward-looking basis exclusively, where you're looking at future costs of new stations and new apparatus and so on, and as that relates to growth. And you can even take an approach where it's a bit more of a hybrid. And that's the approach that we've used when it comes to the development of the fire impact fee as well as the Parks and Recreation impact fee. And the reason for that, the reason for that is, one thing we're trying to be sensitive to is that the assets that are in service today do have some available bandwidth, if you will, to provide service going forward. So we want to make sure that we capture those costs, that existing investment that the city has as a part of the calculation, in part because that approach does bring the fee down a little bit. So, when I mentioned those different approaches a moment ago, what I'll call the incremental approach, where it's a purely forward-looking cost analysis, that's a little bit higher approach because everything's in future dollars. So one thing we're trying to be sensitive to with the approach that we used for these two analyses is trying to weigh those together. So had we used an approach that was a little more incremental in its nature, we could have had even higher fee increases than what you'll see in the subsequent slides today. One other thing to mention, just like you were seeing on the transportation presentation a moment ago, we're seeing some significant increases in the fee levels here for residential and non-residential development for fire impact fees here. And in the subsequent presentation, you'll see a significant increase as well on the Parks and Recreation side. Thanks. So just a little bit of background on impact fees themselves. These are fees that are specifically designed to recover the cost of capacity and capacity-related assets, more specifically, facilities and major equipment in particular for fire, vehicles and apparatus that provide service to new development. These are fees that are paid by new development and new construction that result in an increase in demand for those said services. So as the community is growing, that's placing a strain on the fire department. It needs to expand and put in additional stations, additional vehicles and teams and so on. So it's linking those together. One other thing is, these fees can be used to pay for these growth-related projects that we're going to be talking about a little bit and that have been talked about this morning in the prior group. And you can even also use them to some extent to pay for any debt that's associated with growth for some existing assets. Now, in the case of the analysis today, my understanding is we're using it all just for the projects themselves to buy down any costs there. But I just wanted to mention that's another potential use that you have for them. In terms of the benefits of impact fees, as you all well know, what we're trying to do here is make sure that growth is paying for its fair share of the demand that it's placing for capital facilities on the community. And these are really important fees for the city, because having these fees right-sized for your community, what allows you to do is, at least to the extent possible, is you're trying to right-size the costs that are in the fee that are growth related to make sure that growth is paying for its share. And to the extent that you either you don't have those in place, or that you make a decision or determination to charge less than the full cost, then that differential in what you would have been recovering and what you're going to be recovering ends up getting picked up by the existing residents and the taxpayer. And I'll caveat that by saying, to the extent that you still want to accomplish the same load of projects over that same period of time. So, obviously, if you don't have the funding in the plan, you're going to adjust the plan to adapt for the projects. I get that. But all things being equal, I just wanted to note that. Thanks. Some legal considerations. Again, some of this was talked about already. There's the Florida Impact Fee Act. It was formalized in, I believe, 2006. And it's been amended, as Jonathan had mentioned in his presentation, a number of times over the past few years, with some of the bigger sets of changes taking place in 2021. Some of the things that took place as a part of the 2021 updates relate to, the fee maximums that we were all talking about a little while ago, about the 50% cap on the increase level, the phasing requirements, the 2-year phase-in if it's a certain percentage, or the 4-year phase-in. Some other things that also changed between this analysis and the last one, because of those Impact Fee Act changes, are what you can actually include in the fee calculation itself. So if you were to look back to a prior report, you might see in there as a part of the fire department analysis, not only are we including the stations themselves and the vehicles, but also back then we were including like smaller equipment type items. One of the things that changed was you can't include a lot of those smaller equipment items in the fee calculation now. So that's a little bit of differences that took place there. Some other items that changed, when you kick off an impact fee study from beginning to end where the fees are potentially adopted, you have 12 months to complete that process. We're well within that threshold. This effort kicked off back in, I believe, February, early February. So we have good time there. And then there's some other changes that, again, were discussed previously about what's on the horizon for passing into October and fiscal year 2026, as far as the change in the rules as to what constitutes an extraordinary circumstance. Some other considerations, I have a bit of a laundry list there. I'm not going to hit all those bullet points, but I do want to mention on a couple of them. Part of the requirements here that the calculation needs to be based on the most recent localized data for the community. And based on that rule, we believe we've kept up with that. We're using your most recent fixed asset records as of the close of the books for fiscal year 2024. We're looking at your most recent capital plan for 2025 and beyond. We're looking at, your past couple of years of call data for the fire department. We're looking at your most recent property tax appraiser records for developed square footage. We're looking at population and unit data from the Census Bureau based on recent surveys that they do. They have what's called the American Community Survey, and they do it on an annual basis. And they look at the past 5 years of growth and per unit occupancy and things like that. So we're trying to use all the recent data that we have here in order to make sure that we're falling in line with this requirement here for the statute. Some other items.
Sir, let me jump in here real quick, just so I understand. So we're not using Bieber's information. We're using either current or past actuals.
For the historical side and like for let's say the occupancy factors, that's based on most recent census data for the 5-year survey. For growth projections, there's an element of using some of the Bieber projections for that. I believe also the Florida Housing Data Clearinghouse as well, which is run by the same organization that the University of Florida. They develop long-term population projections, and Carl can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that's the forecast of persons that we have built in.
Okay. We use the comp plan projections that was just adopted for both studies.
Great, thank you.
Some other requirements with the Impact Fee Act. There's the 90-day, what we call a grace period before you implement a new fee. So, from the moment it's adopted, you have to wait 90 days before you can actually start collecting that fee. And that's to give, the building community a chance to update its pricing inventory over that 3-month window to account for those fee differentials. The fees are charged, it was mentioned previously, at the issuance of a building permit. And, again, we've already covered the phasing requirements and some other elements there. Accounting for them separately, that's something the city already does, so I won't belabor that. On the next slide is a little more detail on that extraordinary circumstance and the phasing requirements. Let's see. Any increase that's up to 25% of the current fee level must be implemented over a 2-year period evenly. Any increase over 25% up to 50% has to be phased in over a 4-year period evenly, just like we mentioned before. And you're capped at that 50% level in a standard situation, based on the statute.
Just to jump in real quick, our concern about whether we could phase something greater than 50 seems to be, the state seems to say if you're greater than 25, it should be phased, right? So it seems interesting that the concern would be like a legal gray area once it's greater than 50, where something less than 50 also triggers this mandated 4-year phase. So just wanted to mention that so everybody saw it.
Roger, this is why I wanted to get through all 3 presentations, because I think each of them bring out different nuances of the legislation that we should consider.
We've talked about the 50% cap and extraordinary circumstances, and just as was mentioned previously, that particular term wasn't specifically defined. That there was an attempt made at defining it a couple years ago, which related to the population growth rate of the specific municipality, in this case the city, compared to the average growth rate of the state. That particular criteria didn't pass at that period of time, and so they have other criteria that's going to be a part of the next set of changes that relates to, I believe, permitting and population and a couple other prongs that have to be met as a part of that. One of the other changes was that you only get a bite.
Just one,
yes, sir.
excuse me, just one. I did ask that in one of the other briefings. Once we make our decision on the impact fees and the extraordinary circumstances, other than a legal challenge to it, there's no other challenge. In other words, we make the final decision here. In other words, it's not like another reviewing committee or anything that's going to look at what we do. Well, it all depends on the, okay.
Please proceed, sir.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's okay.
No problem. In terms of some other criteria associated with impact fees, there's what we have that's called a dual rational nexus, which is just a fancy way of saying that whatever costs for capacity are built into the fee as a part of the analysis to get you a fee in place, you then have to use the fees that are collected, the revenues that are collected to go towards those growth-related projects. So it's trying to tie the need that's built into the fee design to the use of the funds and making sure that they go together. When it comes to impact fees, you want to make sure that you have reasonable levels of service for the community that are defined and obtainable. And something that was touched on previously as well was impact fees can't be used to fund any existing deficiencies for the city as it relates to fire service and capacity, and you can't use them to pay for operating costs. These are purely for capital-related needs and not operations. So you can't pay salaries or things like that with the fees.
May I stop you for just a moment, because I want to clarify something. So we can't use them for any deficiencies, but we have had to borrow, or I guess transfer $3 million to our impact fee fund for fire. Can we pay those monies back with future collected impact fees?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Okay.
Yes.
So I wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
The other thing is, when we're designing these fees, we can't include any project costs associated with just standard renewals and replacements of existing facilities. So it's for the upgrades, for the expansions, or for new items, and not the rehab of existing. Switching gears to the fee calculation methodology itself. So like I mentioned earlier, what we're trying to do is design a fee that's cost per unit. So, the numerator would be, the costs that we're including, the denominator being the units that we're dividing through by. So part of the calculation involves, the development of a population projection and dwelling unit projection for the city. Again, that comes from the planning data and the comp plan data that we talked about a moment ago. There's the existing level of service that has to be factored into it in terms of, is that being met, or is there a service level deficiency? Then when it comes to the actual design of the cost side, what we're looking at again is, like I mentioned a minute ago, we're looking at the asset data on the books. That's the existing investment the city has in the department. We're looking at the future planning capital data for the next 10 years as well. Again, accounting for 3% cost inflation built into that. And then we're taking that total cost and we're netting out from that total number any grant-funded projects, any contributions, things of that nature, to make sure that the fees are only recovering the costs that have actually been a cost to the city. And then from there, we take that total cost bucket, whatever that number is, and then we bifurcate it between residential land use versus non-residential land use. And to do that, historically, we've used call data as a representation of demand. The data that we have access to has improved since the last couple of analyses, so we're using not only the call data of the fire department, but we're also looking at the developed square footage of the community as obtained from the property appraiser records, and we're also looking at some other demographic data tracked by the Census Bureau. So it's a bit of a weighted factor now to break those costs into residential bucket versus a non-residential bucket. And then from there, it's a straight calculation of the cost that's been allocated divided by the units. In this case, for residential site, it's per person, and for the non-residential site, it's on square footage basis. So on the next table you'll see here is the population and dwelling unit and developed square footage projections. One thing we've tried to call out in the slide here is the focal point on being 2035. That's the design window that we're looking at for the analysis. So even though we have a population projection that goes from 2025 to 2050 and then some estimates of build out, where we're aiming is through 2035, because that matches the planning horizon of your 10-year capital plan. So we're just trying to tie those two together there. In terms of average annual growth rate between projected for 2025 through 2035, it's a little over 2% per year that's projected. And historically, just the past few years, I know you all have averaged closer to 3.5 or even a little above that. I think the peak being in 2023, that may have been almost 5%. So still some significant growth projected at over 2% per year. The average that you see at the bottom of the table there is again, the growth rate between 2025 and 2050. So that's why it's lower than that. It's because it's a higher growth rate on the front end and it tapers down over time. With respect to level of service for fire, level of service is the indicator of or degree of service provided by the facility or service. The existing level of service for the community, you all are an ISO class 2 rating for your fire department, which is a very good rating. If I recall correctly, it goes between 1 and 10. The lower the number, the better the rating. So that's a very good rating there. Your department has about 75 full-time equivalents or FTEs that are providing that service, and the service target for the community, as Eric mentioned a few minutes ago, was to arrive at an emergency within 7 minutes at least 85% of the time. And the aggregate from our discussions with Chief Berryhill, those targets are being met.
Vice Mayor, if I could just jump in on that topic, and I keep coming back to it because it was just so impactful for me, my neighbors. My neighbor across the street, one of their parents that lives with them, had a pretty significant life event, and Chief Berryhill's team got out there like, I think it was under 5 minutes. It was like 4 and change. Literally saved her life. And so the level of service that we provide here is just absolutely amazing. And we're, thankful that they work hard every day, train for it every single day, and improve to make it happen. And it also, with that kind of service, it helps all of us to have to pay, right, homeowners insurance and everything else. So, as I looked at the initial map where you said, hey, these are areas where we can improve on that response time, this is certainly, I think, a good place to put those impact fee dollars.
So I have a question too, and it's probably for Chief. The question is, I know we're always striving to be the best we can be, right? So 2 is amazing. Is there anything not included in this in terms of capital improvement that would help us get to 1? Or is that attainable with all of this capital improvement?
It's very expensive from what I understand.
I understand.
Kyle Berryhill, Palm Coast Fire Chief. Definitely, we're doing internal analysis on what it would take to go from a 2 to a 1. From Councilman Gambaro's point, the financial impacts related to the homeowner's insurance are definitely, the delta between 2 and 1 is not significant. We always talk about the delta between 10 and 2, what we are, because that's the difference between not us and us. But the impact fee would not be a place where we could strive to improve our level of service. Am I correct, Sean?
Right. If you're going to try to tweak that upwards, that would be an improvement on capacity in a different sense.
Okay, so it would be considered fixing something that already exists versus a capacity issue.
So it'll be up to us over the next 4 years, before the next time we take a look at this, to figure out how to get our service level up to that ISO 1, which is definitely an internal goal that we have. And then the next time we have a chance to take a look, then that would be our established level of service, and then we could design an impact fee to that established level of service.
Okay. Thank you for that information.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It's good to know.
Moving ahead to the costing side, we talked about the units just a moment ago. The existing investment in the department right now, as of the close of 2024, is about $24 million worth of total assets. Now that's broken out between general equipment, vehicles, major apparatus, and vehicle-specific related equipment, and then existing facilities. When we look at that breakdown, general equipment's about 0.3 million, or in the 300,000s range. Again, those smaller items are excluded from this calculation due to the change in 2021 statutes. But we are including vehicle and vehicle-related equipment at about $7.6 million and $16.2 million of existing facilities at the stations themselves. So then from that 24 million and those items noted, we're then also excluding historical grants and contributions of approximately $5 million. Again, we're trying to make sure that we're not accounting for, or we're not making growth pay for items that didn't cost the city any money. So that total net investment today, after grants are accounted for and after equipment's removed, is about $18.7 million. From there, changing the angle to looking forward in time, the total planned future investment over the long term is about $86.9 million. That's in new stations and new vehicles and equipment and so on. But again, we're looking a little more narrow in our scope. We're looking through 2035. So over the next 10-year period of that $86.9 million, which also again accounts for inflation, we're looking at just 2025 to 2035, which is about $52 million of planned future investment. So that includes some existing station expansions and improvements and upgrades, as well as new stations and new vehicles to complement those stations. Again, from that costing side, we then are also excluding renewal and replacement type projects. That's about $4 million of cost that's being removed from the calculation. And then we're also excluding about $8.6 million in projects that are anticipated to be funded from grants and other sources. So the total net planned future investment is about $39.5 million there. So we have the net investment that we're including is about 18.7 today, and about 39.5 million about what's planned through 2035.
So kind of touching on the same thing from last time in terms of grant funding, so additional funding from outside sources. Where are we coming up with this 8.6? Is this stuff that's already been pledged to us, or just an estimate based on past usage?
So my understanding is that's items that have already been locked down in the near-term plan, but anything beyond that, I'll defer to Carl here.
Yeah. The 5 million was a state appropriation that was in there. I believe we had the ARPA funding as grant funded. However, the ARPA funds we had were in that first 10 million, which can be operational. So, you know, if we wanted to recalculate it, removing the 3.6 million or right around that amount of ARPA funds and just use that as the existing citizen share match, we could rerun those calcs and back that out, or we consider it as grant funding, you know, one-time contribution.
I just want to make sure that we're, again, accurate with our.
The only grant we've ever
projections.
gotten is this 5 million appropriation. We haven't received any other grants for capital items that I'm aware of. I think the fire department has gotten grants for other items, but small equipment and other items, nothing that can be capitalized as part of the impact fee study. So it's really, $5 million is one time and only grant we've ever gotten in the fire department.
Gotcha, okay.
So we probably we could rerun that calculation and have some updated amounts for the next one, if you want to pull out the ARPA money out of to be considered as a grant. 'Cause it's
No,
not
I
really a
mean, I
grant.
just think for the transportation side, we do receive that more commonly. Whereas if this is not the case for fire, I wouldn't advocate for increasing our estimates of additional funding. So it makes sense to me. If we very rarely get funding like this, because, for capital projects at least, then there shouldn't be an expectation of that happening in the future.
So then, moving ahead, we take those total dollars I mentioned a moment ago of existing investment and planned future investment, and we look at the number of firefighters that relates to try to come up with an average cost per firefighter. And when we do that, we get about $514,000 per firefighter as a blended cost of existing and planned future investment. From there, we're taking that average cost per firefighter, and we're looking at the total firefighters that you have today, which are the 74 FTEs, and then the additional 33 that would be that are assumed as a part of those expansion-related projects that we had in the capital plan, to get us a total of 107 firefighters by 2035. So taking that, $500,000 and change times the 107 firefighters gets us a total cost recognized of about $55 million. And then what you'll see on the schedule here is that $55 million then being bifurcated between residential land use and non-residential, again, based on the factors we talked about a little while ago, the call data, square footage data, and some other demographic and commuter information to break those costs down. The rough relationship is about 80-20. It's 82.2 and 17.8, but just for discussion purposes, I'll call it at 80-20 relationship there. So then we take those split costs. For residential, it's about 45.2 million, non-residential is about 9.8 million, and then we're dividing it by the unit projection that we talked about a few slides earlier in terms of population at 2035 and at developed square footage and in 2035 to get a cost per person and a cost per unit in square feet. From there, since we're taking a cost per person, but these fees are charged to dwelling units, to actual full-on structures that have multiple people, based on the Census Bureau data that we had access to. That's about 2.52 persons per dwelling unit on average for a residential unit. So we take the $341, which is the cost divided by persons to get a cost per person, and then scale it up to per unit. So the 341 times the 2.52 gives us the $859 fee per unit there. Similarly, we're taking the square footage, dividing it out, and then accounting for it on a per 1,000 foot basis. So you'll get $1,364 per 1,000 square feet. In terms of the overall increase and as it relates to where you are today, the current fee that's being charged is $434.51. This is a fee that's been escalated for the ENR construction index over the past few years since the last study that was done. The prior study, I believe, recommended a fee of, I have here, about $367, so it's been escalated from that level over the past few years. I think that averages at about 4 or 5% roughly per year in terms of the ENR index for inflation there. But the fee increase that we're looking at is, the $859 as it relates to the $434, which is an increase of about $424 and change, or about 98% increase. You'll see there's a graphic, a little comparable table, where you'll see we surveyed a number of municipalities in the region, and then calculated the average fee per residential dwelling unit, and then you'll see your current fee level is about middle of the pack right now in terms on the average. And with at the full 98% increase level, that would bring you to near the top end there of the comparison. One thing I'll mention there is, as far as comparisons go, it's just that. It's a comparison of where you are as a snapshot in time. And what unfortunately the comparison doesn't tell you is for some of these other municipalities, how much grant funding did they get? What level of fee implementation did they do? Did they decide to just do 60% of the fee and cap it themselves as a policy decision, or things like that? Or how long has it been since they've done a fee increase can be another factor. I've worked with communities, I'm working with communities right now that are just now implementing impact fees for the first time ever. And so they haven't had them historically, or they've waited quite a long time. So one thing I'll note, there's a couple of comparables on there with an asterisk next to their name. Those are our communities that we're working with actively right now to update their fees. And what I can tell you, the city of Tavares, that one's going to go up probably a little above the average line that you see there, if I recall correctly. And the city of Apopka, while I don't want to say what's specifically, since it hasn't been officially published, what I can tell you is it would put them on the very high end of the chart as well, just because of the capital facilities. And they're experiencing the same thing you guys are, the high inflation and capital costs and asset acquisitions and so on.
Can I just stop you for a second? Because I do want to share with you all. So I used a source to look up, kind of to see how comparable these cities actually are. Just so you all know, the city of Palm Coast has grown at a faster rate than every single one of these cities, except for the city of Leesburg and the city of Daytona Beach. And that's in recent, I think, the last year or two. But the city of Leesburg only has a population of like around 35,000. Right. The city of Daytona Beach is the closest with around 90,000, but they have a millage rate of over 18. Our millage rate is a little over 4. And they also have a franchise fee, an electric franchise fee. So really, yes, it seems like our impact fee for fire is about middle of the pack now, but would be on the high scale. But it's not really fair to compare with a lot of these other cities because we've grown at a faster clip, and or our population is just incredibly different from these cities. Like I said, the closest one is the city of Daytona Beach. They've grown a little bit faster than us, but they also have a really high millage rate, really high property tax.
To that point, sorry to interrupt, but those funding sources, those alternative funding sources are non-restricted, and it's coming out of residents' pockets directly, right?
Correct.
Versus these impact fees are restricted for specific uses and things like that. So I would argue that those are just not good sources of funding.
Correct,
It's a way around, in those cities sometimes, it's a way around raising the millage rate, and they have separate fees for libraries or other, which are really separate from what we're talking about here.
Right, so I say that to say, yes, this would I say that to say this. When we're looking at affordability of living here, and to the point of some of the speakers that have come up, okay, well, the alternative to not increasing our impact fee, does that mean that we triple our millage rate? Because I would never do that. I don't think anybody up here would do that. So either way you cut it, there's going to be increased costs that have to go towards these improvements. Is it going to come from the cost of growth, or is it going to come from the cost of the current residents? And I think all of us feel that it should come from the cost of future growth. So just want to throw that information out as we consider this specific graphic.
Yeah, and also with this graphic, I would argue that, when you're just about to implement a new impact fee increase, you're always going to probably be, on that higher scale, and then people will pass you, as they do their fee studies and things like that. So,
right.
Unless you're way down there at the bottom, essentially, and have no appetite to increase at that rate.
One of my high school classmates is a city commissioner at the city of Claremont, and she told me that she mentioned that they're getting ready, or they've been increasing their impact fees, and it's had second and third order effects, but in their estimation it was necessary, especially when it came to fire, because their population is exploding there as well.
It is, yeah. Claremont is. They're growing actually at a slower rate than us, but yeah, they've been growing quickly too.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I was actually a part of the study with Mary doing Claremont's as well.
Okay.
Just a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're experiencing some growth and some cost inflation as well. Switching gears from the residential comparison, non-residential is more of a table here, because this one's a lot harder to compare apples to apples. The reason being is different municipalities can charge these different ways. So the city's current method is a uniform square foot, fee per square foot, treating all land uses the same. Different communities may break those out a little bit further, and so as a consequence, you'll have some on the upper end and some on the lower end. So what I can say is for the same surveyed municipalities that we looked at, if we look at just the minimum fee on a per square foot, or per 1,000 square footage basis, excuse me, to a maximum, you'll see that range of between $2 and $4,250 just for fire related service. Again, it's a little tricky to do that kind of comparison just because you're mixing methods across it, but I at least wanted to note the upper and lower boundaries there for y'all. And in terms of the fee itself, it's currently $700 per 1,000 square feet, or 70 cents per square foot, and it's going to $1,364, which is about a $664 increase per 1,000 square feet, or about 95% increase, so somewhat similar to the residential side in terms of its magnitude. So moving ahead into implementation considerations, you know, the residential fee we mentioned earlier is increasing, or is calculated as being potentially increasing by up to 98%. The non-residential fee on the prior slide about 95%. And again, these maximums here that we're showing are obviously much higher than the 50% cap that's built into the kind of the standard process in the statutes, you know, that 50% level. So in terms of implementation options, you know, in terms of putting forth an increase, in our mind, at least, you can either stick with the standard statutory approach of taking the 50% and phasing up to that over 4 years. Again, noting that the fees are going to under-recover for you because you're not getting the full level that's built in. Or you can pursue through extraordinary circumstance implementation, which, again, we had some of the procedural requirements met last week and plan going forward to pursue this increase through those provisions, which is the decision that was agreed upon with city staff at that level in the process. So with respect to the extraordinary circumstances themselves, you'll find they're going to be very similar to what Jonathan discussed in his presentation a little while ago. There's been the very high population growth for the community over the past number of years. Just since 2020, it's been an increase of about 18,000 residents, give or take, which averages about 3.8% per year. Just for a little bit of context, the state's grown at about 1.5%, give or take, so you're well above that average. And the continued projected growth in population, again, at that 2.1% level per year through 2035 is what's necessitating the need for these capital facilities in the plan, the new stations and the new vehicles associated with those stations and so on. So growth is definitely driving the need for these facilities moving forward in time, and it's very significant. Then, of course, there's the impacts of capital cost inflation in terms of inflation on construction costs, but as well as just asset acquisitions. And the reason I differentiate there is, you know, for the fire department, it's not only just building the station, but it's also buying the trucks to provide the service. And an example, you know, when I looked, we were looking at the existing assets of the community, you know, an aerial truck, one of the big, you know, ladder tower types, you know, over 5-6 years ago cost about $1 million for the truck. Now it costs $2 million. You know, that's a very big increase in just a 5-6 year period of time, doubling. And then in terms of cost to construct new facilities, those have increased substantially as well. You know, from our perspective as consumers, you know, the average cost generally relates to CPI, which has been about 27% increase since 2019, cumulatively. And but when it comes to construction materials index, in that same window of time, just material costs have increased over 40% in that period of time. That's not accounting for the labor and everything else. So it's a very high cost environment that you're currently existing in, that's just, quite frankly, differs substantially from historical conditions. So then, you know, some other things to consider along with this is that, just for sake of discussion, if no fee increases are implemented, then about $5.1 million of growth-related capital costs would need to be recovered from taxpayers and other sources through 2035. Now, I say that, and I'll caveat it like I did similarly before. If you're not going to design the fee to account for those projects, then correspondingly you'd pull those projects out of the spending plan. So there'd be some mitigation there, but I at least wanted to mention, if all things being equal on the project side wanted to be accomplished, but there was no fee increase, then that differential of $5.1 million would need to be recovered from existing residents. If you go with the phasing plan of the statute based, the 4-year phase-in over time capping at the 50%, then that would be, I'll call it a deficiency, instead of $5.1 million, of about $2.2 million. So still substantial dollars to be sure, but less than that other level. So in terms of overall conclusions related to the fire side, It's our recommendation that the city consider adopting the calculated impact fees at their full level using the extraordinary circumstance procedural requirements to get that full funding amount built in. Making sure that the city continues to comply with the Florida Impact Fee Act requirements. Making sure that the 90-day grace period is built in so that there's that time for the building community to adapt its pricing structure. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I should have mentioned a little sooner, the discontinuing of the practice of annual indexing on the fees. And, now historically, we designed the project cost, let's say, without inflation, but you were indexing the fees on an annual basis to account for inflation. So it kind of came out in the wash there in terms of the impact to the fee. What we're doing here is we're building all those costs in advance into the fee right now, and then you charge it over that window of time because you can't do the indexing anymore.
Which is 3% per year.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. And then again, we would recommend that in 4 years' time, the city would go about like it has done historically. I think it was every 5 years you averaged before, of looking at the fees and updating the costs in there to make sure they're appropriate to the community's needs.
Okay, thank you so much for that presentation. I'll bring it back to the dais and start with you, Councilman Miller. Do you have any questions or comments?
No, I think this one's pretty straightforward. The only question I had was part of that formula in terms of the additional funding. So I think I'm good with that. Just the conversation about what we all think, and I know we're kind of agreeing to look at this holistically. The reality is, though, that the transportation portion of it is the vast majority of this potential increase. So as that goes, I feel like everything else kind of goes. So I have no issues with the full amount enacted immediately to make sure that we're funding our fire department appropriately.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's the same thing, extraordinary circumstances, and I agree with the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Gambaro.
I echo the comments from my colleagues here, but also, as we look at the different kind of buckets of impact fees, to me, this is the priority, right? And in my mind, given the resources or how we bring in these fees, it's a limited pool from either the residents or business folks in our community, companies, and certainly if we're going to have something at the highest rate, to me, this is it. Because it's our number one mandate for our residents. Thank you for your presentation. I thought it was excellent, and it covered a lot of areas where I think the previous one didn't. And so between the previous presentation and this one, I think it was a good complement of helping me better understand the impacts of the statute and the things that we can and can't do. So really appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll echo the comments of my colleagues. I also think that we accept the extraordinary circumstances, and I agree that this should be implemented immediately, specifically since we did have to take $3 million from our general fund and transfer it over to our fire impact fee to cover projects. I think it's really, that brings up a really good point that we all need to keep in mind. Parks and Rec and fire both come from general fund, so that's property taxes. So we are, whatever we're able to get from impact fees is a direct correlation as to how low we can help to keep our property taxes.
That's true. There's also the aspect in terms of service level that the more you build, the more you got to maintain, and it costs us long term.
Yeah, and I think that that's definitely a conversation to be had for Parks and Rec. I mean, that's going to be a big one. And that does kind of go to one question I did have, which was, so for transportation, 100% of those projects can be paid from impact fees, but for fire, some new projects, some of those have to come from current residents, right? A proportion of that funding has to come from current residents, correct?
Yeah, that we did that calculation at the end of Eric's city slide presentation. We're looking at the existing number of dwelling units and then the build-out number of dwelling units, and the percentage there, we're at about 46% of ultimate build-out, so that'd be the existing citizens' share.
Right, no, and I appreciate that. My question is, even if we collect, and again, I'm just throwing out random numbers. Let's say we collect $1 million in impact fees next year. And so we say, okay, we're ready to go do whatever it is that we want to do with this $1 million in impact fees. Have we budgeted, or do we know how we're budgeting from the current residents that share to match that?
Currently, we've been using the sales tax dollars that the city receives for the city match on these projects. But when you get into these much larger projects, like the brand-new station that's out in the 6 to 10-year plan, that's going to be a difficult one to put that money aside. We'd have to do some long-term planning in there. We need to start thinking ahead as to how we're going to be funding the city share side. Not so much on the fire side, but on Parks and Rec, we're talking about much bigger dollars.
Yeah.
And I did have one question. On the ARPA funding, since we showed it as grant funding and didn't have to be, did you want him to recalculate the fee, which would go up slightly from what he proposed when we come back at ordinance?
Why did we include it in I mean, I understand it's grant money, it's government. You know.
It was money, right, federal dollars given to the city, but the first 10 million, it was more for operations. There's no ties to it. Anything above that, we had to comply with, like anything like SRF funding, we used it on on one of the utility projects. So it was just the way we did it because it came as ARPA funding. We put it in the grant pot, even though it's not necessarily a grant. So we could back that out of the grant allocation.
Well, it is additional funding that's going towards fire, correct?
Right, which it could be the existing citizen share portion. It could be used as that match on the county sales tax dollars we get.
You could just note that. You could just put an asterisk.
Yeah, I mean,
It would change the fee slightly. The fee would go up a
right,
little bit.
but we are using that money for this fire CIP, correct?
Right, but he's backing it out of his net cost when he does his calculation, so we would not back that out, and he'd run his new calc. So it's just a matter, that'd be one cleanup thing if we wanted to do before we come back.
How much was it? Was it
3.6 million or so?
Yeah, so it would change that number from 8.6 to 5.
Right, and I think we might have shown the 5 in both.
Well, the 5 was historical, that was on the books through 2024.
Yeah.
What was included in the planning side, the forward-looking side was 8.6 right now.
Yeah, that's what I saw.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what your guys' feeling on that.
I feel like it's accurate at 8.6, right, if it's being used.
Yeah, you could just asterisk, put a note, just make a note.
Yeah, if that's how
where
we're
it came from.
utilizing it, then I think that's how it should be
Yeah,
reflected in the study.
if it's a placeholder that's not ultimately going to be used for that, or it's not guaranteed funding yet, or something like that, then,
One-time funding.
yeah.
Do we anticipate being able to fund the current resident portion of these projects in the amount of time that we'll collect these impact fees?
In our 5-year plan, we show dollars coming in from the capital projects fund, the sales tax fund, but beyond the 5-year plan, the sales tax ends, I think, in 2032. So it'd have to get renewed by the county to continue that. And then depending on the MOC, because the MOC is being funded out of that portion, at least the general fund portion, the public works portion. So it all depends on priorities. What do you want the dollars to go to keep the MOC moving forward, slow down the MOC, put money towards the match on fire and parks? So we don't have enough money to go around, so we're going to need direction from council as to where that money goes.
But by the time that would sunset in 2032, there's going to be another impact fee study anyways.
Yeah, in the 5-year plan, we do show the match coming from that fund. So the 5-year we should be fine. But when we go to renew the fund in 4 years from now, we're going to need to have a big, hard discussion on how we fund this existing citizen match, because it's going to only go up as we add more dwelling units.
Sure. Okay. Are you all comfortable giving direction on this one then, so we don't have to come back to it? Or, sorry, Councilman.
Yes, I've got just a quick question. So, I mean, we talked about trucks and facilities and, different things. What about the kit, the equipment, that is all the new equipment that each of, the new trucks and have to be outfitted? Can these funds be utilized for that? Because it's new, right? It's not refurbishing or...
So what the statute allows you to do is, while I mentioned on the front end that the smaller equipment items have to be left out, what the statute does allow for is it says vehicle-specific equipment. So anything that's going to go on one of the trucks as well can be included. So that is built in there.
All right. So employees, like our new firefighters that need equipment and gear, that doesn't count. It would be specific things to that apparatus.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure I understand what's being captured. Thank you.
Any other questions? Did you have something, City Manager?
I was just going to kind of reaffirm what Carl said. As you recall, in your 10-year CIP presentation that was done on April 22nd, we reviewed the strategy of each fund, and the Capital Projects Fund was look at existing facility rehabilitation and projects, right? And then focus on critical and urgent need, whether it was AC replacements, et cetera, IT infrastructure, then funding for the MOC, then funding for non-impact fee share of parks and fire, and then maintain flexibility to look at grant projects as they arise. And Carl is correct that that small county surtax expires December 31st of 2032. And that is how we fund the majority of our general fund capital projects, right? Utility collects it within its enterprise, stormwater collects it within its enterprise, but everything else comes from that bucket.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? All right, are you all comfortable? Well, we'll go out to public comment. We'll do that, and then we'll come back for any direction. Public comment on the fire impact fee. There aren't many people left.
I know. I'm still Anna Maria Long from the Flagler HBA. I wanted, sorry, I have my stuff up here. Fire Station 22, I just wanted to ensure that the impact fee money is only going to be used for the capacity increase and not any of the tear down, et cetera. And I know I've talked about that a little bit, Vice Mayor, with you about Fire Station 22 specifically. So if you guys could get into the nitty gritty on that with staff and, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Sean, with Sean, thank you. Additionally, while we still vehemently oppose the premise of the extraordinary circumstances across the board on all three impact fees, we will not oppose anything with fire. We just cannot accept the premise of extraordinary circumstances. However, we do believe that all citizens of the city of Palm Coast should have the highest level of service, and we value the services that our firefighters and paramedics provide. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any other public comment? Okay, we'll bring it back. Could you go through exactly what is being funded from the projected impact fees for Fire Station 22, please?
Yeah, we did an analysis of two components. We look at the existing site at Fire Station 22 is on now, and then the new site, and then we prorate the site development cost and back out that portion as non-capacity portion of the project. I want to say it was near 30%. Then we look at the square foot of the building compared to the new square foot of the building, and we back out that percentage of square foot, and that was a little over 30%, I believe, like 34%. So again, those dollars, based on the overall cost, are not capacity related and are funded solely by other funds. They're still in the impact fee fund, but dollars are being transferred in to cover that cost of the existing station portion capacity.
And just to be clear, so from that 30% that is based on expansion, that was even probably, I would assume, decrease even a little bit further to account for the current resident portion of that as well, right? Or no?
Right, so say the station's 10 million, we back out 30%, just for easy math, so 3 million. So then you take, so that's funded separately, $3 million. And then you take the 7 million balance and you split that between your existing citizen and the new citizen.
Right, okay, thank you for that clarification.
And anything for current Fire Station 22 of repurposing it into a historical arts culture facility would be in your next discussion and presentation. Yes.
Thank you.
Funded out of the capital projects fund or park impact fee fund.
Okay.
Put it over to parks.
Any other questions?
I'm good.
All right, are you all comfortable giving direction on the fire station at this time, so we don't have to come back to this one, or do we want to wait?
Public commentary, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
So are we good with accepting extraordinary circumstances and imposing the full proposed amount at this time?
Yes.
I am, yes.
Okay, I am as well. So that is the direction. Is that all the direction you need, City Manager?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Oh, are you here? You're here for Parks and Rec too, aren't you? We're going to break for lunch, though. How long does everybody want? Is 20 minutes good to come back at 10 after?
Yeah.
10 after 1?
Okay.
Okay, we'll be adjourned until 10 after 1 p.m.